I'll just go over my PO procedure quickly. I'm Ross. I'll be your PO today. Pretty standard PO procedure. I have cards, one at 2 minutes, one at 2:30, one at 2:55, and at 3:05, I'll slowly put my fingers down every second, and at 3:10, I'll verbally cut you off. Because we're on Zoom, it probably will take like 1 or 2 seconds for you to actually be able to hear it. So just when you hear my voice, please just stop if you get to that point. For questioning, pretty standard, 20-second time card, and at 30 seconds, I'll cut you off and call on the next speaker. PO sheet is in the chat. There's also a tiny URL for it, which is tinyurl.com/EIFRR25. Other than that, if there's not any questions, I'll go ahead and open up the floor for docket nominations. Are there any nominations? Senator Rai.
I nominate docket A comprised of Myanmar followed by electric vehicles.
Seconds. Any objections? All right. Are there any other docket nominations? Any motions? Senator Xiao.
Motion to close the floor for docket nominations?
Seconds. Any objections? Seeing none, we now have our docket. I'm going to go ahead and call for any authors for our Myanmar bill. Any sponsors? Senator Nichol.
All right, are we ready? Reese, are we all good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In 2021, the people of Myanmar voted in a democratic election. They believed, perhaps naively, that the military would respect the outcome. But democracy was met with a gun barrel. In the dead of night, the Myanmar military, known as the Tatmadaw, seized power, imprisoned elected leaders, and began a campaign of terror that continues to this day. I rise in strong sponsorship of this legislation to provide military and humanitarian assistance to the National Unity Government, Myanmar's exiled legitimate government, and the resistance forces bravely fighting to restore democracy. Let us be clear. The military junta is a regime of war criminals. According to the United Nations and Human Rights Watch, the junta has bombed schools, used airstrikes against civilians, and burned down entire villages to the ground. In 2023 alone, the military conducted over 1,000 airstrikes, killing hundreds of non-combatants. As of today, over 4,000 civilians have been murdered and more than 27 million people displaced. This is not a conflict between two sides. It is a genocidal military crushing a democratic society. The National Unity Government, by contrast, is made up of the very lawmakers the people of Myanmar elected in 2020. It has united various ethnic groups to form a broad-based pro-democracy coalition. It is committed to establish federalism, restoring rights to the Rohingya people, and recognizing international norms. This is who we aid. First, this bill is a moral obligation. Just as we supported solidarity in Poland and the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, we must now support the people of Myanmar. As Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel once said, neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Our silence would be complicity. Second, this bill advances U.S. foreign policy. The junta is backed by China and Russia, receiving arms, economic support, and diplomatic cover at the United Nations. Meanwhile, the NUG seeks alignment with the United States. Third, this aid is measured and responsible. We're not proposing direct military intervention. We're offering aid, including encrypted communications, medical supplies, intelligence tools, and humanitarian aid to refugee camps. People may ask why America should get involved. Because if we wait until this becomes another Rwanda or Bosnia, we will ask ourselves why we didn't act sooner. This is our moment to act before the genocide, not after the headlines. The world is watching. The people of Myanmar are watching. And history will ask if we stood with the oppressors who bombed children or the people who demand a voice. Support this legislation, and let's show the world democracy is not alone. Thank you.
Speech time 2 minutes 59 seconds. Questioners either raise your placard or raise your hand. Okay. I'll give a second just because it's the first questioning block. That's gonna go to Senator Saenz.
Hi, how is China going to react when they see that the US is aiding the rebels fighting the China-backed junta?
How is the U.S. going to react when we see
No,
that
how is
we're
China?
countering Chinese forces, people that are backed by China? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying, is China going to let the junta fall?
I mean, I'm sure China will do what they can to keep their allied regime in control.
So we're starting a
and do what
proxy
we can
war.
to topple it.
So we're starting a proxy war, right?
Senator Naraine.
For democracy.
All right, great speech, Representative Nichol. You talk a lot about how the NUG wants to support a federalist government. What type of federalist government?
A type that gives rights to ethnic minorities, does not change the Constitution, and does not deny elections.
So are we talking about an ethnic federalist government?
Well, the group that we're supporting, the United Government right now, they already have support from minority groups. They have these rights and these people are already in their interest, right? So when we support them, they're going to continue to hold those interests.
Is
Senator
exacerbating
Dominguez.
ethnic problems a good thing?
Senator
You said
Dominguez.
you said China's willing to do everything that in their power to fight against the rebels, right?
Probably, yeah. I think they'll escalate their support.
So are we starting a war in Myanmar? Or prolonging the
Not
current war?
directly, no. Again, this legislation doesn't commit any U.S. troops. All it does is give aid to the civilians of Myanmar.
Right, military aid.
And the
That's
forces that
arms
work
and
to protect the
munitions.
government.
If we're giving them military aid like arms and weapons, doesn't that prolong the current war if China's going to do the same?
No, it doesn't. The
Senator
war's already
Hain.
ongoing. We can't stop it.
Senator Hain.
Oh, hey, let's talk a bit about those ethnicities. Why are they creating a coalition in the status quo?
Well, they're doing it to support themselves because the current government is brutal. And
Yeah, they're supporting themselves
and
against the
hurting the
junta. They have a collective desire to band up against the junta. When you pass and destroy the junta, what's their desire to cooperate?
Their desire to cooperate is to build a better Myanmar. I mean, it's the same reason that our founders made this country.
If the
It's-
ethnicities hate each other, won't one party want more power than the other?
That's the
Thank
problem
you,
in any
Senators.
democracy. I
The
mean,
questioning
again,
block has elapsed. Seeing as that was an affirmation speech, all negation speakers rise. Between Senator Adams and Senator Saenz, that's going to go to Senator Adams.
I thank the chair. For the judges, my name is Senator Reese Adams from the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, speaking for the first time on negation of this piece of legislation. Please let me know when I'm good to go. And if there's any objections or anybody isn't ready, just give me a sound, please. All right. Anybody following current events will know that the United States has less than a sterling record of ensuring that our military and humanitarian aid ends up in the right hands. And because of that, we need to be especially careful in distributing weapons that can kill, as this bill does, because when the US props up human rights abusers, it not only permanently destabilizes the international landscape, but it delegitimizes this very Congress and the United States of America as at large, dampening our ability to ensure progressive change in the future, anywhere in the world. Senator Nichol is displaying a level of historical myopia by saying that we can get in before genocide starts because there was a genocide since starting in 2017 in Myanmar. USA tells us in 2021 that Burma's military forces launched a genocide against Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine State, neglecting to mention that the Arakan army, an ethnic militia fighting on the side of the national unity government, has been participating in those same ethnic cleansing incidents since the beginning of the conflict and attacked Rohingya civilians as recently as 5 months ago, according to AP in August 2025. Representative who are claiming that the junta is losing control are frankly citing forces that are similarly abusing human rights. Understand that I'm not critiquing this bill because I don't support the national unity government. I am critiquing this bill because I do. I think the junta is one of the most brutish authoritarian regimes out there. But when we don't attach any conditions to our aid, we run the risk of sidelining the national unity government in favor of a genuinely genocidal and anti-democratic militia that is jeopardizing the cause and threatening civilians. Understand, under Section 2 of this bill, there is free will to redistribute funding from the top line of the ethnically diverse national unity government to specific militias, including the Arakan Army, which is cited by name in this bill. I couldn't imagine anything more irresponsible because per Jessica Stanton of UPenn in 2017, militias and rebel groups with strong human rights records are more likely to secure short and long-term ceasefires that are necessary to admit humanitarian aid. So when we are empowering a group with a weak human rights record, the weakest imaginable, the perpetrators of a genocide, we are losing the ability to ensure that humanitarian aid actually gets to the point where it needs to be. So we're doing two negative things because we are giving military aid to people who have committed atrocities, and then that military aid is in the long run leading to the failure of humanitarian aid. So disregard any aid projects that the affirmation will bring up because understand those cannot happen in the future. Take India as an example of the legitimization of the Arakan Army by foreign aid. March 2024, the Diplomat tells us that an Indian delegation met with the Arakan Army after 7 years of designating them as terrorists because they wanted to collaborate on humanitarian aid projects. Giving them humanitarian resources as well as weapons only ends one way. Don't let the other side paint a picture of a bad guy against a good guy. There are good guys on both sides, but we have to understand that genocide is a red line for the United States and its military aid.
Speech time 3 minutes 7 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Kabra.
Hey, Senator, does Section 2 of this legislation clearly state that any aid will go with approval of the DoD?
Yeah.
So how does that mean that we're funding groups that support the junta if we know in this bill we've explicitly stated we don't?
I didn't say they supported the junta. I'm saying that we are funding groups that have participated in the Rohingya genocide, and those groups, whether or not they oppose the junta, are simply too immoral for us to support.
Okay, so if they are immoral, can't we decrease our aid? That's just a suggestion.
Like we did to Israel?
It's still over the
Senator
DoD
Ostheimer.
congressional oversight.
Hi, you don't want to send any money to the Arakan Army, right?
Right.
Because they're complicit in the genocide, right?
Right.
Doesn't Section 1C give this Congress and the State Department full authority not to send them any money unless we approve?
We are creating a wealth of weapons, of offensive technologies that we are then sending to be disbursed overseas by defense contractors and their lobbyists in the Defense Department.
Not necessarily. We're sending this to the People's Defense Force, which is the national unity government's military. They're
And
only
they've collaborated with the Arakan
Senator
Army.
Ryan.
We need to create a standard.
Senator Rye.
Are we primarily funding the national unity government or the Arakan Army?
The national unity government.
Right. If we make sure that the national unity government is the government that takes control, isn't that a better world than when the Arakan Army on its own can take power?
So you can say that if, but that if fundamentally doesn't exist when we have a bill that is giving them a blank check to redistribute funds to the Arakan Army, which is anti-democratic and against ethnic minorities.
You just agreed with me that we're funding the national unity government over
and giving them the funds
Army.
to disburse to the Arakan Army. We need to put restrictions on what they can do with this money.
Senator Dominguez.
Does this bill give the People's Defense Force carte blanche to give these weapons to whoever they want?
Not whoever they want. It specifically names the Arakan Army. In the
Right,
second half
but
of the
Section
bill.
1C specifically says that first they have to get approval from the DoD, right?
Right, and the DoD, as Senator Nichol established, has this goal of defeating China in any way possible. I don't see sufficient evidence that they're going to prioritize
but
human
even our
rights over that.
sponsor admitted that he is against this genocide. If these groups are
Well,
actively
we're all against
supporting the
genocide,
genocide,
but we have to stop it by putting in restrictions, not just
so
by
then
hoping
why
that
don't we
it'll
just
work.
aid the
Questioning
People's
block
Defense
has
Force?
elapsed. We're now going to call on an affirmation speaker. All affirmative speakers rise. That's going to go to Senator Getting unopposed.
Thank you to my parley, judges, and chair. That's Senator Getting, Getting. I know there's a couple people in this round, so I'll just give it a few seconds and then I'll begin. Cool. In high school, I was told that nice guys finish last. So I became the bad guy. No more math homework. Quadratics can wait. I even went to Disney.com without asking my parents for permission. But I wasn't the only one breaking the rules. And when the junta breaks the rules, Myanmar is left broken. Past this legislation, beyond the casualties mentioned by both Senator Nichol and Adams, the junta have caused a full-fledged humanitarian crisis in Myanmar. The United Nations writes just last month that since the junta began their coup in 2021, conflict has displaced 3.5 million people and left 22 million Myanmars in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. That's exactly where this legislation steps in to end this crisis in two key ways. First, with military aid that tackles the root of the war. Because from a military coup blocking off aid, the junta aren't just responsible for creating this crisis, but for every life lost in the 3.5 years since. The only way to stop this crisis is by ending their reign of terror. Senator Adams, the alternative to ethnic minorities and militias isn't peace. It's the junta that created a genocide in the first place. If you don't want to support them, our very own DoD can prevent that from happening at all. Here's why our military aid can and will end this war. The United States Institute of Peace quantified in May 2023 that the size of Myanmar's military has already dropped off by 50%, and is now down to just 70,000 soldiers. Senator Saenz, China has already left the junta to fall, and they're weaker than even my old Toyota Prius. Now is the time to strike and deliver a decisive blow for democracy. But second, on humanitarian aid that benefits the people directly. And this aid has been proven to work in the past. The Core Research Program quantified in April 2023 that U.S. humanitarian assistance has already reduced starvation risk for 388,000 civilians throughout Myanmar, while international assistance has reached nearly 4 million people across the country. Under Section 1B, we continue these successful programs, allocating a further $200 million in food, water, medicine, and more to help the same children and families in crisis. And this aid literally saves lives. The European Commission writes in January 2024 that 1 in 4 people face hunger or serious illness because the junta have destroyed Burma's healthcare system. Inaction is inexcusable. To sit and wait amidst starving Burmese children isn't a question of administrative bureaucracy. It's about our values as a nation. Look, I may have done my homework, and I turned it in on time. But just like the junta, I'm a big liar with a six-pack. It's time we finally stand up for the Burmese nice guy. Affirm this legislation.
Speech time, 2 minutes, 50 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Adams.
Our representative, in what time frame do you think that this bill is going to end the war?
I think that is up to our Department of Defense, who can estimate that far better than anyone in this Congress.
But do you have any evidence? Have you looked at any evidence that would suggest that we could end this war?
Absolutely. They're falling in numbers. This is the time to strike, and we can absolutely end this war in just a few years.
Okay, so in the meantime, when, as I showed you in my speech, we are reducing the ability of humanitarian aid to help people, how can you vouch for all of the people who are going to be hurt by poverty, food insecurity, and lack of health care?
Unequivocally incorrect. We have
Senator
$200 million to
Saenz.
humanitarian assistance.
Hi, does China want U.S. influence in Myanmar?
There's already U.S. influence. We've given millions of dollars in aid. That's non-unique.
It doesn't have any influence over the junta. China does, right? So how will China react when the U.S. starts arming rebels in their backyard?
Probably the same way they've reacted when we've helped them in the past, which is by falling behind because they can't
Never
afford to
given
support
them
it.
weapons like this before. The Chinese foreign minister literally said that's where they draw the line.
Yeah, but this bill is going to make sure that we can stop them because they've already fallen in
Why would
support.
China let us?
Thank you,
Because they
Senator.
don't really have a
The
choice.
questioning has elapsed. We're now going to move on to a speech in the negation. All negation speakers rise. That's going to go to between Senator Naraine and Senator Saenz. That's going to go to Senator Naraine.
Point of order, I was raising my placard.
Oh, my apologies. Senator Hain.
You're good. Howdy. My name's Representative Hain, spelled H-A-I-N. Once again, H-A-I-N. Fun day, fun round, lot of lovely faces. I'll take a lovely sound if anybody is not ready. That looks lovely. Fixing the camera. All right, we're good. For some reason, the affirmation seems to think that the conflict in Myanmar is some kind of football game. Our sponsor, Representative Nichol, was literally cheering on the People's Defense Force as if they were the Green Bay Packers. But unfortunately, if the affirmation is so gung-ho about their football representation, they're more like the Dallas Cowboys. This bill might have some promise, but in the playoffs, they're bound to choke, fail, because when you stop one conflict, you only start another. I want to end the clash between Representative Adams and Getting by actually siding with the negation. Yeah, the big bad Topman Daw is going to be fallen by this legislation. Here's why. As Frontier Myanmar reports in January of 2022, the People's Defense Force has been doing a number on the Topman Daw without proper military equipment. Representative Getting already told you that the Topman Daw's numbers are crumbling, and that China's supporting them less and less. $200 million of the best military equipment in the world is going to sink them under. But that's not necessarily a good thing. Because Representatives Nichol and Getting, the good guys aren't as great as you say. As the Armed Conflict Location and Events Data reports in November of 2024, the ethnic armed organizations cooperating with each other to kill the Topman Daw are only doing it because they have a common objective. Representative Getting, think about it like this. Before the Civil War, it was everybody versus everybody. After the Civil War, it was everybody versus the big bad Topman Daw. It created a kind of stability and unity that the Dallas Cowboys don't have right now. And Representative Getting, that stability has furthered them to make sure they coalesce and cooperate, looking over all of their different ethnic backgrounds. As the International Crisis Group reports in August of 2020, the ethnic tensions in Myanmar haven't gone away and they aren't going to. The only reason they've been put on pause is because of the Civil War, because there's something more important. But when you pass, you remove that single incentive for them to cooperate, and pandemonium ensues. Representative Nichol says everybody will cooperate, but to that I say, if everybody doesn't like each other, and there is a history of ethnic conflict, there will be infighting, because there has been in the past. As the Council of Foreign Relations reports in January of 2022, before this civil war, there were decades prior of smaller civil wars between ethnic armed organizations. Pass, and you proliferate that suffering. Because when you don't have a common objective, when you don't have a single hope, you choke at the playoffs.
Speech time, 2 minutes, 57 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Getting.
Hey, I told you in my speech that 22 million Burmese people are in need of urgent humanitarian assistance compared to just 1 million before the conflict. How is that stability?
We can give them aid without giving them military assistance.
Yeah, I'm simply saying that since the conflict, 21 million people are now in need of humanitarian assistance that weren't before. That's not stability.
When you pass, you remove any amount of predictability because it's the simple comparative of everybody fighting everybody versus everybody fighting the Topman Daw.
And that Senator lack of predictability.
Hey.
Hi, can we agree the biggest reason civilians are dying are because of airstrikes they cannot stop?
That and starvation?
Sure. If you're giving them air defense weapons, which are specifically defensive, how can that cause more fighting? Doesn't it save civilian lives?
Here's the thing. The Topman Daw is creating a unity because they're the one big bad guy to defeat, creating no plan to destroy them, having them be gone, and then having ethnic communities that historically hate each other to their own devices is a recipe for disaster.
That doesn't respond to my question. How are defensive weapons that save civilians a bad
thing? Senators, the questioning time has elapsed.
Motion.
I thank the chair.
Can whoever said that, can you say motion again? I couldn't hear you.
Motion.
Senator Adams.
Approach the chair with an amendment.
Put it in the chat or
yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I'll DM you.
Granted. All right. I'm gonna call on affirmation speakers. All affirmative speakers rise. That's gonna go to Senator Rai unopposed.
I thank the chair. Hi everyone. That's Senator Rai, spelled R-A-I. Unless you scream at me, I'll assume all of you are ready. Awesome. If the last half an hour taught us anything, is that even the best of causes require help. Whether it's Senator Nichol, however powerful his sponsor, requiring Senator Adams' assistance to give his speech, or Senator Hain and I preparing for this round this morning, every meaningful endeavor requires the assistance of others. Democracy in Myanmar requires our help too. Pass this policy to give it to them. I want to give you two fundamental reasons why passing this policy is beneficial, not just during the Civil War, but in the world after it. First, Senator Dominguez, Saenz, and the rest of the negation are all worried about the side effects of the conflict continuing. My issue is, we've been fighting this war already for nearly 5 years. You don't end the war by doing nothing. You end it by tipping the scales. I would argue the winner of this debate should be bringing us closer to a long-term end to hostilities. Passing achieves that because it makes the rebels simply from going and winning battles to winning the war outright. As Reuters warned on March 25th of 2025, although the rebels are currently succeeding on the ground, they've yet to win, Senator Hain, because they lack the air defenses to protect themselves. The junta is still surviving because they can launch airstrikes every time the rebel make an advancement, killing 40 civilians every single day. But finally, by passing and giving them defensive air systems under Section 1A, the rebels can finally win the war. For example, as the Eurasia Times reported in June of 2021, when the US gave similar air defense to the Afghan rebels during the Soviet invasion in the 1990s, it led to a 79% increase in shootdowns of Soviet aircraft. It was so effective, it was the tipping point forcing the Soviet Union to withdraw. Here's the evidence you wanted, Senator Adams. The success we had in Afghanistan against the Red Army can be replicated against the junta. As Brookings confirmed last January, by stopping their air force, you not only do you stop attacks against civilians, you leave the junta with no option but to negotiate. If air defense could repel the mighty Red Army, Senator Saenz Dominguez, I can guarantee you it can force a dying junta to peace as well. But might I remind the negation, China benefits from peace too. The war in the region endangers millions of dollars in their assets. They want peace even more than we do. But then, Senator Naraine, Adams, and Hain raise very valid concerns over funding some groups over others. I would contend that funding the National Unity Government is supporting the best chance at the long-term future for Myanmar. As the U.S. Institute for Peace explained in February of last year, 82% of Myanmar, across every single ethnic group, would support the National Unity Government over their own militant groups if it brought peace. Senator Adams, this proves the Arulkumaran army would dissolve if the National Unity Government would take power, resolving your concerns because they'd put down their arms. So Naraine, Adams, and Hain, it won't divide Myanmar, but support its unification. By ensuring the right government is supported, we make sure that the peaceful government takes control, not the violent ones. This bill doesn't just bring a permanent peace, but a democratic one. Give it to the people of Myanmar and pass this.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Questioners rise. That's gonna go to Senator Hain.
Why would ethnic communities with a history of hating each other magically band together?
You had to look at the reason they turned to warfare in the first place. It's because they didn't have their interests any other way. Because now 82% of people believe that the National Unity Government can represent their interests, they are willing to put down their weapons.
Wait, but you said they were nationally aligned because of the Todman Daw. Remove the Todman Daw, what is their alignment?
The Todman Daw threatens their interests. That's one piece of the puzzle.
And even besides that, you said there's 20% of the population that doesn't support the National Unity Government.
Hi, Senator. So when the National Unity Government has empirically been redistributing its funds to ethnic armies rather than consolidating, as you say, how will that change when we pass a bill that just gives
That's
more
called
funds?
consolidation. When I'm making other groups work with me, I am taking control. That is exactly what we want.
They're already working with the National Unity Government, but they're working in a way that's decentralized and federalist. Why don't we try to regulate that at least a little bit under this bill?
Under this policy, it's more centralized because now they're relatively more powerful than the other groups that you mentioned.
Why? When we're giving funding
because
to those
they have the
groups as
weapons
well, it's
no one
an
else
increase across the board. No?
No,
Thank
they're
you,
stronger
Senator.
than anyone else.
You may be seated. All right, seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, all negation speakers rise. That's going to go to Senator Naraine.
Right. Just let me know if you guys can hear me. Am I good?
Yep, you're good.
Nice. All right, so speaking for the first time in today's Legislative Assembly, I am Representative Naraine and speaking in negation. I'll begin on my first word. Just less than a month ago, in a stark briefing to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights described a country that's gripped by war, repression, and deepening suffering. Clearly, the conflict in Myanmar is a serious one, and I really do hope that peace can be achieved and democracy can triumph in the region. Unfortunately, this legislation doesn't accomplish that. Instead, it exacerbates the suffering and the death that's plaguing the region. It's for that reason that I am proud to negate. Because first, American intervention harms the people of Myanmar. I think we as Congress can all agree that the end goal in Myanmar should be a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Unfortunately, by passing this legislation, that outcome isn't accomplished. Because Section 1A of the legislation allocates $200 million in military aid to the PDF, including but not limited to drones, small arms, mortars, and ammunition. Here's the problem with that. Instead of advocating for peace, this legislation sends a message to the juntas. The United States government is not interested in peace, and neither should you be. But also, Section 1C is extremely alarming because Section 1C of this legislation arms specific ethnic groups, distributing military aid towards them as well. Representative Nichol, ethnic violence is obviously a concern, especially in Myanmar, and supporting or endorsing groups based on their ethnic identity goes against the very concept of civic nationalism and democracy that we hold so dear here in the United States. Supporting an ethnic federalist state doesn't quote unquote make a better Myanmar. Instead, it destabilizes the region as it did in Yugoslavia, South Asia, and as it's doing in Ethiopia right now. Supporting war should never be the foreign policy of the United States. So what is the solution? Well, Senator Rye, the real best solution is to try and get parties to peacefully negotiate. And that's exactly what ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, has been trying to do. And passing this legislation undermines their efforts, because it's not the responsibility of the United States government to interfere in the foreign affairs of a country like Myanmar, especially when we aren't educated enough to make correct interventions as Congress. But do you want to know what party is? It's ASEAN. ASEAN's primary framework for addressing the crisis is the 5-point consensus agreed upon in 2021. The 5PC calls for an immediate end to violence, constructive dialogue among all parties, humanitarian assistance, and a vision by an ASEAN special envoy to Myanmar. And those actions is something that I can get across and that I can support. I say all of this to make a point. At the end of the day, there needs to be a Myanmar-owned and led solution to the crisis. And any lasting resolution must come from within Southeast Asia itself. For all those reasons, you negate.
Speech time 3 minutes 7 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Arulkumaran.
Thank you. So why haven't negotiations worked like that ASEAN has done?
Right. So ASEAN negotiations between both parties in Myanmar is still ongoing.
But why hasn't it worked for the past couple of years?
Right. So it actually has worked. In some aspects, in some aspects, they have been able to decrease conflict in some areas.
Okay, but violence has increased as a whole.
What we don't want is a complete collapse of conversation between both parties.
Okay, but that's just wrong,
ASEAN
right?
is the only
in the past 5 years, violence has gone up dramatically. There's no proof of negotiations working.
Hey, is ASEAN the only organization that's organizing ceasefires in Myanmar?
I'd assume not.
No, right? China's also involved. But the thing is, the conversation is already very complicated. What is so different about us supporting the only government that's actually been elected by the people?
Right, exactly. That's the problem. The conversations are so convoluted and so complex. And so when the United States steps in and says, we're going to support a party and we're just going to give them military aid and we're going to give specific
ceasefires aren't the same as supporting democracy.
But that's not what this legislation does. It supports ethnic groups.
All right. So our amendment has been ruled germane. So is there a motion to amend? Senator Adams,
Motion to amend.
So this does need a 1/3 second to continue, but first I'm going to go ahead and read out the amendment. So the amendment changes Section C, striking the Arakan Army and adding at the end of Section C, under strict scrutiny by the Humane Rights Violators and War Crime Center, which will conduct monthly reviews of aid deliveries. It's also in the chat if you want to take a look at it. So we do need a 1/3 second to continue. All those in favor of debating the amendment, raise your placards. So, all right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, that's more than 1/3. So debate on this amendment is going to start. Are there any motions? Senator Ostheimer?
I move to the previous question on debate on the amendment.
Seconds. Any objections? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and vote on this amendment. All those in favor of passing this amendment, raise your placards. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, that is a 2/3 majority, so this bill will pass, or this amendment will pass. So Section C is going to be rewritten based on what's in the chat. We're now going to go ahead and continue on with today's legislation with that amendment. All right, all affirmation speakers, please rise. That's going to go to Senator Xiao.
Hey everyone, for the first time today, that's Senator Xiao. I'll wait for any indication from my judges if you're not ready. Okay, great. I'll assume everyone's good. Those that forget history are doomed to repeat it, is what my mom told me the 7th time my brother ate the last brownie out of the fridge. God, that annoying brat always gets on my nerves, and I never end up learning my lesson. But as brothers, as sisters in fighting at home, in Myanmar, brothers and sisters are in arms, fighting to protect their home, no matter whether in backyards or battlefields. A mother's wisdom to learn from the past is why we vote to pass this bill in the present. Now, so much of this debate has been focused on the war in the short term. Representative Getting and Rye tell you this aid is going to boost the NUG to victory, while Representative Adams tells us we're holding them back by blocking future aid. But in my mind, both sides are wrong. I would argue that the rebels will win the war regardless of this bill. And I know that because they've done it before. Representative Hain tells you that the rebels in Myanmar are winning right now, but it's actually bigger than that. Look to time last October, which explains that before the coup, the junta had been fighting against the same rebels for almost 7 decades, and they had never won a single war. Like, damn, in 7 years, we've had Google, Kendrick, MJ, and LeBron, a dozen Nick Ostheimer retirements, and a social media frenzy over the literal words 6-7. And the junta hasn't won a single time. Pass or fail, the rebels will win the war on their own. But I can already hear the negation asking, what's the point of this bill? Because the rebels still need our help to maintain a government. And this legislation does that in 2 ways. First, by backing the NUG, we make one actor a leader in this conflict. Representative Hain thinks ethnic armies will collapse into conflict once the NUG begins. But Representative Rye has already shown that the NUG has the political support of ethnic armies in the region. But even if I agree with Representative Hain and say the armies still have their concerns, this legislation finally cements support for the NUG because we give them the money to put where their mouth is. Al Jazeera reports in June of 2023 that the main struggle the NUG has with unifying Myanmar is that ethnic armies don't actually believe the NUG has the resources to support them. Senator Adams, when we give them the goods, they can finally lay the foundation for a blossoming society. But second, by lifting up the NUG, we actually ensure the new government is diplomatic, democratic, and humane. Senator Adams and Hain, I agree that NUG has problems. But if they're going to take power regardless, we need an American foot in the door of diplomacy to make sure they don't turn into the next authoritarian regime. At the end of the day, the most important impact of this legislation isn't a victory for the present, but stability for the future. Because it won't matter which side waves the right flag if 10 years later, that flag is stained red with blood. My mother always told me, it's the promise of a good sister to always be her brother's keeper. I want to make sure sisters in Myanmar have a country united enough so they can be their brother's keeper as well. You can keep that promise by passing this legislation.
Speech time 3 minutes 5 seconds. Questioners rise. That's gonna go. Okay, between Senator Saenz and Senator Hain, that's gonna go to Senator Saenz.
Hi, so the rebels are currently beating the junta, right?
Yeah.
So then why would we risk ruining all that by angering China?
Right. So I think you've been going on this point this entire debate, but the thing is, it's a very, very low probability China's going to take any material action against us. They're in the region because they want rare earth mining, right? But the thing is, they're not going to nuke us just because we sent a couple
not
of...
nuke us, but just back the junta more. They've already signaled
No, you're getting it confused. They're actually backing both sides right now, and my side has a they're leaning towards the rebels.
Hey, let's clarify. Did Representative Rye say that everyone supports the national unity government or a substantial amount of people?
80%. I think that's enough.
Okay, so a fifth of the country still opposes the ruler and still wants to continue
Yeah.
fighting. How is that peaceful?
A fifth of the country opposes the NUG. 90% of the country opposes the Tatmadaw. I would choose the side that 80%.
Why can't you create unity behind that 1/5 that doesn't support the NUG instead
If
of
I
just
had to choose between
proliferating
80%
fighting?
and 20%, I choose 80%.
All
That's
right.
literally what
Thank you,
democracy
senators.
is.
The speech questioning time has elapsed. We're now going to call for a negation speech. All negation speakers rise. That's going to go to Senator Saenz unopposed.
I thank the chair. Hi, everyone. I'm Representative Emilio Saenz, speaking for the first time this legislative session. That's Saenz, spelled Saenz for my judges. There's a lot of you, so I'll just take silence as an indication you're ready, and I'll go ahead and get started. Cool. My family in Mexico has a saying, no te metas donde no te llaman, meaning don't get involved where you're not called. The US acts like every international conflict is calling us to be saved by American guns. When has that ever worked? Please think twice before you flood Myanmar with US weaponry. Stay level-headed and fail this legislation. So far, the affirmation stakes their entire case on overthrowing the junta to establish democracy. I'll meet them there and show you why it's only their world that makes that goal impossible. I'll be the first to make the comparative. Right now, as Representatives Xiao and Hain tell you, the rebels are actually winning, gaining more ground than ever, and the junta is on the back foot. But Representative Xiao, that's only because China is letting that happen. According to the East Asia Forum in January of this year, China has a risk hedging strategy where they back both the junta and the rebels in the civil war because China doesn't really care who wins as long as they keep influence over whoever's in power. If we pass this legislation to China, the rebels they once tolerated now look like US puppets, and they will never accept a Western-backed rule in their backyard. Take it from China's own government, as the Comparative Connections Journal in May of 2024 wrote that China's foreign minister warned the US that arming the NUG, just like this bill does, would directly undermine Chinese interests in the region because they need Myanmar to access rare earth minerals, and it's their only connection to the Indian Ocean, which is a key Belt and Road route. China will never trust a US-backed rule to secure their interests like the governments they literally fund. Remember, we're literally China's enemy in the middle of a trade war. That means when the alternative is the US-backed rule taking power, China doubles down on the junta because for them, it's no longer rebels versus junta. It's US versus the junta, and they will do whatever it takes to prevent Western influence. The war the rebels are currently winning now becomes unwinnable. Representative Nichol, you plunge Myanmar into a proxy war of US versus China, and it's one that China won't lose. Representative Getting, you think China abandoned the junta, but per the Stimson Center, just 4 months ago, China just pledged $3 billion in assistance to the junta's military. It's ridiculous to assume that $200 million in US weapons is enough to just plunge the rebels to victory, especially with Trump in office. There is no shot the US funds the rebels more than China funds the junta because it doesn't benefit America in any way. The only way to meet Senator Rai's burden of long-term stability with a national unity government rule is if they continue winning the war as they have been without US backing, because that's the only way China is fine with it. When we pass, China sees the NUG as US proxies, and all hope is lost. The status quo, the rebels are literally winning. Don't go and mess it all up under the pretext of fighting for democracy.
Speech time 3 minutes 4 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Kabra.
Hey, Senator, with China's multiple engagements and multiple regional flashpoints, what makes you think that it has the resources to engage in Myanmar?
They
with the
literally,
United States?
that's why 4 months ago they pledged the junta $3 billion.
Okay, does that mean that they are directly engaging in war with the United States or that they are willing to do so?
No, it's a proxy war. They're going to fund the junta.
Exactly. So even if they are funding the junta more, don't we have the winning rebels and that side to also provide assistance to against them?
Yes, but we won't provide as much assistance as China will, especially with Trump in office. There's no benefit to America.
Isn't passing today's legislation to stop Chinese influence
Senator
in
Ostheimer.
$1 billion won't do anything.
Hi. Why does China support the junta in the first place?
Because the junta supports Chinese interests.
Right. They have vested business interests in the region, like a ton of factories, right?
Yeah, sure.
Doesn't China want whichever outcome leads to the least property damage in Myanmar?
China wants the outcome where they retain the most control over Myanmar's government. If it's a US-backed rule, they view that as they're losing control.
I mean, Myanmar is going to stay right next to China. This isn't going to be a US-backed government exactly. They want whatever outcome leads to the
Thank
least
you,
damage.
Senators.
Literally
You may be
US-backed
seated.
government. Thank the chair.
Affirmative speakers rise. That's going to go to Senator Ostheimer.
I thank the chair. Hi, all. My name is Senator Nicholas Ostheimer. Judges and PO, please give me a heads up if you're not ready. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and get started. In May of 2024, the New York Times interviewed Mr. Shan Gui, one of the foremost veterans of the Civil War. But at just 17 years old, he admitted he has never seen a live firefight. Instead, he has racked up dozens of successful strikes on Tatmadaw military bases by flying drones with an Xbox controller. Make no mistake, he is fighting for his country's future. Pass this legislation because American support will help him win it back. But first, Senator Adams and Hain question whether the rebels are really the good guys. Yes, because they have a vested interest in sustainable peace. The New Humanitarian writes in September of 2024 that rebel forces have wrested more than 86% of the country's territory from junta control, governing more than half of the country's population. Even in the middle of a war, they have redeveloped basic infrastructure, healthcare, and aid distribution. Senator Hain claims that victory would just lead to a free-for-all between the ethnic militias. But that wasn't the case before the dictatorship took power. Myanmar was a relatively peaceful federal democracy. Last February, every major ethnic militia signed a charter agreeing to uphold the old constitution when they win this war. That is a future worth fighting for. Here's why this bill helps them win that fight. Section 1C of this legislation overcomes a deadly stalemate, winning this war for the Democratic rebels by arming them with drones. Almost exactly a year ago, the Irrawaddy newspaper reports that rebel forces seized the northern state capital, Xiao, primarily with strategic drone strikes that forced junta forces to flee. But Senator Xiao on my own side is a bit too optimistic, because less than a month later, China cut off the flow of weapons to the rebels and gave the dictatorship access to Chinese intelligence and signal technology. The Armed Conflict Center reports that agricultural drones that the rebels used for combat have more than doubled in price from $3,000 to $6,250, and the junta's new signal jammers almost completely counter the rebels' low-budget drone warfare. On July 1st, Su Mon, an expert on the Burmese Civil War, writes that the rebels could and would have won this war by now if they were able to continue the drone offensive. Senator Saenz, China knows this just as much as we do. They don't particularly care who wins this war as long as they can sell weapons to somebody and protect their vested business interests in the country. If America passes this bill and picks a winner, they will have no choice but to go along with our decision because they don't care who wins as long as their factories stay intact. We can make that happen by enabling the rebels by investing in $200 million of comprehensive military aid, delivering them the drones that they need to win this war once and for all. The negation has every right to be hesitant. Just like you, I am sick of America starting wars that leave millions of people scarred for decades to come. But while Shangui operates drones from the jungle to win back the country he grew up in, realize this is your opportunity to end a war, not start one.
Speech time 3 minutes 4 seconds. Questioners rise. Again, all questioners please rise. Senator Saenz.
Hi, didn't I give you evidence of my speech of China explicitly stating that the US backing rebels would undermine Chinese interests?
Of course, China doesn't want them there because they're already supporting the junta, but that's bluster. If you take them at face value, then that's not how you conduct foreign policy.
Oh, China's just going to let the American-backed rebels win in the country that's right next to them.
Yes.
Why? Haven't they already said that they wouldn't, and wouldn't it hurt their interest because they no longer have the connection to the Indian Ocean?
No, because they have pretty much just as much influence over the
You,
junta.
Representative Xiao, and the rest of the affirmation have been looking at ethnic armed organizations as a monolith. Are all of them on board with creating sustainable peace?
I mean, all the ones that have signed the federal charter with the national unity government have.
Wait 1 second. That's what they said to defeat the Tatmadaw. What makes them good on their word?
Because that's exactly how the country operated before the Tatmadaw took power.
Except tensions have risen since the Civil War.
Yeah, because there's a civil war.
Yeah, except those tensions don't
Thank you,
immediately
Senator.
evaporate
The
when the Civil War
questioning block
ends.
has elapsed. You may be seated. Negation speakers rise. Again, all negation speakers, please rise. Are there any motions? Senator Xiao.
Motion for a 30-second in-house recess.
Seconds. Any objections? Seeing none, 30-second recess.
Okay, so I don't care about breaking cycle right now, but we have 3 more speeches, and if there isn't a single neg in any of them, that means we have to break cycle like 4 times. So I would suggest.
I think it's just on recency. So I think whoever has the lowest recency should probably give an egg.
So we can break cycle now, but then that would mean Senator Dominguez would have to flip.
I can try. Would have been nice to know in advance, but when I voted at the beginning of the round, it did not look so app heavy.
Unfortunately, the recess has elapsed. I'm gonna again call for negation speakers. All right, seeing no negation speakers, I'm gonna break cycle and call for affirmation speakers. All affirmative speakers, please rise. That's gonna go to Senator Arulkumaran.
Thank you. So this is Senator Arulkumaran, Arulkumaran, Arul, if that helps you find me. I just want a thumbs up from like all my judges and my competitors. Everyone can hear me. I'm audible. Perfect. Thank you so much. And if no one has anything else and we're all good from my PO and my judges and competitors, I'd be happy to start. Okay, sounds good. This Congress stands on the sidelines while Myanmar struggles to stand. We are sitting idle while people in Myanmar ask for just 3 meals a day. Our complacency will never fill their stomachs, but if you take action, it will. That's why you should pass this legislation. Now, I think we all understand that very fundamentally, we understand the urgency of Myanmar's crisis. So this debate really comes down to whether this legislation makes their situation better or worse. Let me prove quite simply why it will get better. First, let's talk about the military aid. Representative Adams, Naraine, and Hain all argue that this bill will increase violence against the people. Let me give you 2 very simple reasons as to why it won't. First, Representative Hain, the ethnic groups actually want to establish a democratic government together, regardless of the Myanmar's junta's influence post-war. In fact, as the diplomat explains on March 22nd of 2025, that the ethnic groups have had several diplomatic meetings to actually form a democratic government. They are already buying into this idea, but they need to force the junta out in the first place. Representative Hain, it's only by passing this legislation that you actually give them the chance to form their own government and to unite as one. But second, Representative Saenz brings up a pretty good point. What about China? Well, quite simply, here's why Chinese influence just doesn't matter. Myanmar analyst Bertel Lintner from the Council on Foreign Relations points out just 1 week ago, Myanmar's junta has seen an 80% decrease in manpower, with those soldiers even joining resistant groups. The number of bombs and bullets from China doesn't matter without the bodies and the beings to use them. Representative Saenz, it doesn't matter how much weapons that the Myanmar junta gets if they don't have the people to use it in the first place. So instead of seeing violence aggress, I would argue that we are going to see our aid success. That brings me to humanitarian aid. Now, I think my side has done a really poor job of explaining how crucial humanitarian aid actually is. Glenn Hutchins, co-chair at the Board of Brookings, explains on August 14th of 2023 that we can give something called cross-border aid, which occurs at the border of Myanmar, and it has had an overwhelming amount of success from neighboring countries. In fact, as foreign policy expert Elliot Adams furthers on May 15th of 2024, Thailand and India both used it to provide over millions of dollars in supplies. In fact, it allowed 100,000 Myanmar citizens annually with life-saving healthcare. Representative Hain, you tell us that ethnic groups will fight each other to survive. With our humanitarian aid, it isn't a matter of survival. There will be more enough to go around. By providing $200 million to aid in the people, we can ensure that their debts are paid, their food is made, and their stories will never fade. Representative Naraine, that ensures that our mission won't be unsuccessful like the negotiations you champion. It will be completed. It's because these people in Myanmar live, in a world where their future is threatened.
Thank
They
you,
should be
Senator,
able to
for that
live
speech
better.
of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Naraine.
All right, great speech, Representative. A lot of people on your side of the aisle have argued that the NUG is this great party that only is dedicated to democracy. But isn't it true that this party is engaged in human rights abuses, including but not limited to unjust killings, rape, and the use of child soldiers?
First and foremost, a majority of that was not sanctioned by the US government. So therefore, if we are providing humanitarian aid and military aid, we have authority over what that goes towards, and we can
Right,
make sure
it's
it
going
doesn't
to
go
the
towards human rights
NUG,
abuses.
and the
Senator
NUG have
Saenz.
committed these human rights abuses.
Hi, if the rebels are winning the war in the status quo, why risk messing that up with this legislation?
Just because they're winning doesn't mean the war is over. They still have to force the Myanmar junta out, and that's what this legislation does.
Yeah, which will eventually happen because, like you told me, the junta is down 80% of their manpower. Why risk angering other powers and turning it into a proxy war?
Well, it's because we can't wait 5 more years and more Myanmar civilians to die just for the war to be over. If
How is
we
it
can
gonna
end
take
it now,
5
then
more
we
years?
have to do it now.
How is it going to take 5 more years?
Thank you, Senators. The questioning block has elapsed. All negation speakers, please rise. Again, all negation speakers, please rise. Seeing none, the chair highly frowns on a one-sided debate, but all affirmative speakers, please rise. That's going to go to Senator Kabra unopposed.
I thank the chair. For the chamber's reference, that is Senator Kabra, spelled Kabra. Again, just Kabra. I will get started. Just give me 1 second. Any sign of indication for my PO? NL. Okay. A pregnant woman in Cayenne State turned away from a malaria test, knowing just one mosquito bite could kill her and her baby. A child in Chin State losing the mobile clinic that delivered his life-saving HIV medicine. A father in Zyging with TB, coughing blood, knowing help will never come. Their survival now depends on whether this Congress restores the aid that has been taken away from them, passes legislation to protect it. Now, so many cycles in today's debate, we've already been left with only 2 questions. 1, where aid goes to and whether it's effective. And 2, does China retaliate? I'd like to prove why the affirmation wins on both sides. First, let's strike down Representative Hain's, Adams, and Ryan's repetitive argument that working with ethnic groups makes the situation worse. Now, Representative Ostheimer has already told you that they've agreed in national agreements, but here's the precedent of their ethnic armed groups forming overlapping alliances. As the Center for Strategic and International Studies found in July of 2024, the KIA co-leads the Northern Alliance with the TNLA and the MNDAA, and collaborates with the pro-democracy NUG and its PDF in joint campaigns like Operation 0307. These coalitions coordinate offensives and have made major territorial gains against the junta since 2021. But Representative Hain asks, what actually makes these actors good on their word? Turn to Representative Adams' amendment to this bill, which places them under strict scrutiny by the human rights violators and war crime centers, with monthly reviews of our aid. But if that's not enough, I want to be the first on my side to actually prove the link on why local actors are more effective at delivering aid in any scenario, because they have the networks and the knowledge to access hard-to-reach populations while bypassing the restriction and the manipulation of the junta. As Brookings quantifies in 2025, the Kachin Independence Army alone has demanded and facilitated greater international and local humanitarian aid for more than 232,000 internally displaced people. And as the Anti-Corruption Resource Center review in April 2024 furthers, empirical studies show that robust oversight and routing aid through locally accountable actors cuts diversion/loss that Representative Adams is so worried about to the junta to under 5%. Representative Naraine, I disagree with this notion that this bill gives power to a sole party because it empowers a coalition of local actors that work with the NUG and gives us oversight of them. But let's go on to dispel the notions of proxy war championed by Representative Saenz, because China's rhetoric is always louder than its reality. As the BTI index finds in December of 2024, China's already overextended with multiple regional flashpoints, and its influence is direct and destabilizing because of its overextents, and it doesn't have the resources to escalate in Myanmar. What truly matters in this debate is lives. In a country where close to 20 million people will require humanitarian assistance this year alone. Remember the mothers, the fathers, and the children. Choose aid.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Dominguez. Oh, sorry. Okay. Of those standing, that's going to still go to Senator Dominguez.
Historically, when the United States or any other country tries to give humanitarian aid to Myanmar, what happens?
Okay, in the past, that it has been redirected to the junta because we haven't established proper oversight. This is exactly what this bill solves for.
How exactly does this bill provide oversight? Are you talking about the military aid?
We're talking about the DoD, the Human Rights Violators and War Crimes
Haven't
Center.
other countries also tried supplementing this aid with military aid, and they've also seen it fail, like Australia?
Okay. Every single piece of aid is subject to approval from the DoD and all of these organizations.
But that means nothing if it's stolen.
Hey, so the scrutiny under aid, under Representative Adams's amendments, is over how it's used, right?
Sure.
Okay, so if they violate it, what's the Human Rights Council gonna do?
Okay, so DoD can cut off the aid. That's how
Okay, but we've already given them the aid. It's a one-time package.
There's monthly audits, so we can cut off the next monthly supply.
But it isn't a monthly supply. We're giving it in one full swoop.
Okay, what we could do is just take back or essentially.
What we could do, that's not what the bill does.
Okay, but we can pass further legislation to make sure that that happens. It doesn't mean that today's
All right,
legislation.
thank you, Senators. The questioning has elapsed. You may be seated. I'm going to call for negation speakers. Senator Dominguez unopposed.
I thank the chair. Good afternoon. I'm Representative Senator Dominguez, speaking for the first time today. I'll give my judges a few seconds to get ready, and then I'll go ahead and get started. The jewel-rich soil of Myanmar has always been ground for war. Since the 1800s, the gem trade in Burma has divided and devastated the people. Above ground, where blood is shed over conflict stones, and in mines, where sapphires signify suffering and amethysts amplify agony. Yet buried beneath ruins and rubbles, hiding in the shadows of shattered lives, lies a diamond in the rough, waiting not to be mined, but to remind the world that beauty rises from pressure and pain. While the affirmative champions this bill as some kind of uncut gem, it will only prolong the suffering that the people in Myanmar face every single day. It's important to note that the humanitarian aid that the affirmative has advocated for this entire debate is inherently good. The problem becomes it won't get to the people who need it the most. Look past even the ethnic groups that have muddled up the clarity of this round. I'll be the first to tell you to turn to the status quo of humanitarian aid in Myanmar. BBC reports on April 2nd, 2025, that after countless robberies and raids by the junta, the People's Defense Force and ethnic groups and the Red Cross have all stopped aiding each other because the aid is continuously stolen. They're not the only ones, however. As the BBC furthers, a general decrease is happening in the amount of aid being sent to the country from other countries. Senator Nichol, this is nothing new. The Tatmadaw has stolen humanitarian aid every single time we send it into the country because Senator Xiao and Rai, the Tatmadaw is a brutal military force, and they understand that if they want to keep their power in the country, they need to weaken their people. That means sabotaging any aid that enters Myanmar's borders. That's why after the 20 aid packages that we've given, according to the Humanitarian Rights Watch in 2022, we've only reached 15% of the global humanitarian aid of what's necessary to save the people. That's where Senator Getting tells you that's what this military aid is for. However, it will still be stolen because we're only prolonging the conflict and going to infuriate China. Turn to Senator Saenz' analysis on what China is going to do after we pass this piece of legislation. 3 impacts of this aid being stolen. 1, our aid workers are killed. Al Jazeera finds that more than 400 aid workers have been killed as a direct result of trying to get aid to the people. Our hired American troops want to help those in Burma, but if they're being killed, this is no benefit. They signed up to help people, not for themselves to be killed. Secondly, we empower the junta. When the junta gets this aid, they are able to extort it back to the people in order to recruit more and more people willing to fight for their cause. And third, increased tensions. Now that American weaponry is being used to fight hundreds of thousands of people in Burma, who knows what will happen? Our name will only signify tensions in the region and push the junta to do military actions that will harm even more. No stone is worth more than a soul. Let justice be the jewel you fight for. Fail.
Speech time 3 minutes 7 seconds. Questioners rise. That's gonna go to Senator Getting.
All your evidence comes from international aid agencies. I told you in my speech that US aid has already helped 388,000 people in Myanmar stay off starvation. How is this bill any different?
How many people have we also harmed by giving them aid that is stolen?
Our aid has not been stolen. There's not a single piece of
That's
evidence
not
that
true.
US aid has
Our
prevented
aid
that.
has historically been stolen. Whenever we give it to them, at least 20 to 30% of aid is stolen.
No, that's international agencies. US aid has been
The United
historically
States is
effective because we
also
use proper
working with
channels.
international agencies. We don't give
Senator
aid. Since we abolished
Arulkumaran.
US aid, we don't give aid by ourselves.
Yeah, so I already addressed this point by explaining to you that we can do what's called cross-border aid, which has had a 100% success rate and is yet to be
Wait,
stolen.
I'd argue that cross-border aid is even worse because if we're just letting this
Yeah.
aid be at the border
Okay.
without actually going in and defending it, there's an
Question.
even higher likelihood it's stolen.
Does the Myanmar government have jurisdiction over our cross-border aid?
They don't. Which border?
No, like, do they have jurisdiction?
Which border? It
It's
depends.
it's like the border over the ocean.
Which ocean? Like which country specifically?
All right. The questioning block has elapsed. Since we've exhausted all speakers, I'm going to unilaterally move to previous question. Also, I'm going to count Senator Nichol as an affirmation since he's gone due to connection issues and he was the sponsor. All right. All those wishing to pass today's legislation, please raise your placards. All right, I'll give a second. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, all those wishing to fail today's legislation, please raise your placards. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, on a vote of 8 to 4, this legislation does pass. Congratulations to the sponsor, Senator Nichol. Are there any motions? Senator Xiao.
Motion for a 5-minute recess.
Seconds. Any objections? Seeing none, 5-minute recess. So I'm going to go ahead and continue debate on our next piece of legislation. If you look on the PO sheet, it's reset to the reverse of what it was before. So I'm going to go ahead and call for any sponsors on the EV bill. That's going to go Senator Ostheimer.
I moved to a division of the House just to take splits real quick to know which side people intend to.
All right. All those wishing to affirm the legislation, please raise your placards. This isn't like official or anything. This is just count. All right. 1. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Senator Adams, is that raising your? Okay. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think. Okay. All those wishing to fail the legislation, raise your placards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, cool. We're good. All right. So that division of the House is done. We're now going to move on to calling for sponsors on our EV bill. Are there any sponsors? Senator Adams, unopposed.
I thank the chair. For the judges, again, my name is Senator Reese Adams from Massachusetts, ADAMS. Please just give me a verbal indication if you're not ready. Otherwise, I will get going. Sacagawea, Joseph Stalin, Jesus Christ, Leonardo da Vinci, Sappho, Andrew Jackson, Isabel of Castile. All these individuals belonged, as you do, to the earth. And it was their job, as it is yours, to share it with their fellow human beings. Not all of them met the mark, of course, and we curse some of their graves, but they're all buried in the same ground. And they all looked up at the same sky. I would be remiss not to tell this House that failing this resolution would be to shout loud and clear that nothing, not even our sacred duty to our planet, can overcome the vanity of nations and the ignorance of jingoism. At the very top, I will tell you that the International Council on Clean Transportation just 2 days ago had reported that due to the decarbonization of the US electrical grid, the carbon emissions benefit from electric cars is increasing from a 71% reduction in CO2 emissions to a 77% reduction. With that in mind, pass this bill, because there have to be issues more important than thumping the Chinese. According to the Center for Strategic International Studies in 2024, climate collaboration is a bright spot in US-China relations that keeps diplomacy afloat, quote, even when other issues are challenging. Governments need to force the private sector to do unattractive things that are in their national interest. So the fact that China is incentivizing its companies to manufacture climate technology is a net positive, and we shouldn't be punishing them with punitive tariffs, which is why this resolution lowers tariffs on the materials needed to build EVs and electric vehicles themselves. I mean, look at US corporations. They don't treat electric vehicles as a potential climate solution because they profit from selling them as a scarce luxury. McKinsey found in 2022 that US EV companies benefit from the luxury model more than from a mass market model. And the International Energy Agency reported in 2025 that high barriers to entry in the industry make it an oligopoly, with 5 companies keeping prices as high as they like. So it should be unsurprising that the US International Trade Commission predicted in 2024 that EV imports from China would force American companies to lower their prices to compete. Whichever way you slice it, more American-made EVs are getting bought alongside foreign ones when we pass, especially because this bill lowers import duties on the materials that are required for US companies to build EVs in the first place, per CNET in February of just this year. Senators, until a nurse in Missouri and one in Hebei, a sanitation worker in South Carolina and one in Jiangsu, and a student in New Mexico and one in Shandong realize that when it comes to the vitality of our planet, they are all fighting the same fight, we are all slated to go down together. I'm sure I'm going to agree with a lot of what the negation is going to say about Taiwan and Xinjiang and Hong Kong and surveillance in Tiananmen Square, but I just don't consider the People's Republic of China to be an evil beyond negotiation, because only an evil beyond negotiation could justify not coming together on an issue that affects every single human being. Pass this bill. We have to unite.
Speech time exactly 3 minutes. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Ostheimer unopposed.
Does America use fossil fuels to power our grid?
Historically, yes, and in the present, still yes. But we've seen from my source from the International, what was that? The International Council on Clean Transportation, that due to our decarbonization of our grid, it's decreasing in the status quo.
Considering that EVs require huge amounts of industrial mining, which create emissions in their own right, are EVs really better than internal combustion engines in the United States?
Well, not necessarily in the United States, but when we're importing
Senator
technologies from China, yes.
Hey, so what's the average American consumer going to prefer? A less expensive car or a more expensive car?
They're going to prefer a cheaper car, which is why it's good that competition is going to drive prices down.
Obviously. So then China's cheaper cars are bought more. Who has better industry standards for making EVs, China or the US?
I'm sure you're going to tell me that it's the United States, but the fact is that our industry has this luxury model that is leading to people being priced out of getting electric cars.
If we're coalescing to combat climate change, how is lowering the standards going to help?
Hey,
What do you mean
so
by standards?
when we see an increase in EV usage, we also see an increase in demand for EV chargers, right?
Mhm.
Who's building those chargers right now?
In the status quo, certain EV companies have been building the chargers. They were funded under the Inflation Reduction
Right.
Act.
So
and
like Tesla, right? What
among
happens
other
when
companies.
what happens when those companies are blown out of the water and can no longer invest in the chargers that Americans need?
What do you mean by blown out of the water?
When China sells cheaper cars,
I
Tesla
showed you that
doesn't
that's not going to
have
happen. I showed you that US companies are going to lower their
I don't
prices
think they can
and
do
go
that with
away,
labor laws and stuff
away
like
from the
that.
luxury model, which they benefit from.
Hi, Senator. Who innovates more in low carbon EV production, the United States or China?
What do you mean by innovates? Like mass market, more development of patents?
Who makes the EV production process cleaner, the United States or China?
Thus far, the United States, but with materials from China.
Okay, so what's stopping us from building our own domestic production instead of opening ourselves up to...
You know what's stopping us? Massive tariffs on the materials that are required to build EVs, which my bill gets rid of.
Have we been able to produce...
Thank you, Senators. The question has elapsed. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, all negation speakers rise. Senator Hain, is that a placard?
No, it is not. My bad.
Okay. All right. Then that's going to go to Senator Saenz unopposed.
I thank the chair. Hi again. I'm Senator Saenz, speaking for the second time today. I'll give my judges a few seconds, then I'll go ahead and get started. Cool. In the great toilet paper shortage of 2020, my brother, who refers to the toilet as his throne, was convinced it was caused by his enemies that were out to get him. But the real reason was just a supply chain issue with China. I'll be the first to agree with the affirmation. China is a necessary trade partner in more industries than just toilet paper. But I'd rather they come to us than we cave to them. Fail this legislation, because in the status quo, we are set to get every benefit of Chinese EVs Representative Adams wants, but better. Right now, Chinese electric vehicle companies don't want to miss out on the American market, but they also don't want to pay the full tariff. That's why in September of 2024, the National Committee on US-China Relations wrote that Chinese EV manufacturers are moving operations to Mexico because under the USMCA free trade agreement, goods made in Mexico can trade with the US tariff-free or at a much lower tariff. And the Atlantic Council on January 29th of 2025 gave us an example, writing that BYD, the largest EV manufacturer in the world, is building a manufacturing plant in Mexico to dodge the US tariff. That means in the status quo, Chinese EVs will already enter the market via Mexico, and we get every climate benefit of EV adoption Representative Adams wants. But under this legislation, EV companies no longer have to move to Mexico because we dropped the tariff on China to just 10%. So naturally, the factories will stay there. But having the factories move to Mexico is comparatively so much better because expecting cars to be built ethically in China is like expecting me to wear pants to this Zoom meeting. It just won't happen. But on a more serious note, a 2023 report from the Business and Human Rights Resource Center found that in a Chinese EV factories, they rely on forced labor, especially by Uyghur Muslims who are detained, relocated, and forced to work under slave-like conditions. The report also cites child labor, worker deaths, and routine abuse with no legal recourse because the Chinese government is actively supporting it. Mexico is the better alternative because one, the Mexican government won't shield companies, and two, under the USMCA, the US can trigger labor reviews when violations happen under the Rapid Response Labor Mechanism. AP News gave us an example of this on May 28th of 2024, writing that a Volkswagen factory in Mexico was accused of unfair worker treatment. As a result, the US stripped their tariff-free status and the factory was thoroughly investigated until they made it right. If Chinese factories are building cars in Mexico, we are able to hold them accountable. Representative Adams, I want EVs to be in our future just as much as you, but I don't want them to be built on broken backs. The problem you want to solve is solving itself, and our future is brighter than ever. Embrace it.
Speech time 3 minutes, 5 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Adams.
Hi, Senator. So you talk about manufacturing in the status quo, manufacturing by Chinese companies in China or by Chinese companies in Mexico. Do you know what's preferable to both of those?
What?
Manufacturing by American companies. So why, in the negation world, are we keeping obscenely high tariffs on all the materials that American companies need to build EVs on our own shores?
We are building EVs on our own shores, and Americans will just switch to the Chinese EVs.
And Senator, that's precipitously dropped since the institution
Senator
of tariffs
Ryan.
on batteries.
Is this legislation only reducing tariffs on EVs, or other materials too?
No, also the other materials.
Right? Solar cells and batteries. Don't those things reduce the cost on other things in other industries beyond electric vehicles?
I'd argue I'd rather have China making their EVs in Mexico, even if it means American companies have to pay.
I'm talking about EVs. I'm talking about batteries and solar cells, right? That creates jobs in the US, that expands industries. Is that not a reason to pass?
I think reducing our dependence on China's
Senator Dominguez unopposed.
It seems like you're on a roll, but I just have one question. Does this bill completely get rid of tariffs on China or just lower it?
It just drops it to 10%.
Drops it to 10%, right? What is the tariff on the USMCA? It's free trade, right? So it's 0%. Isn't it still cheaper to build in Mexico than China?
Yeah, but it doesn't justify them moving all the way to Mexico. All their supply chain is in China.
Well, yes, it does. If you said they're already starting to build factories here, then they already have some investment here.
The USMCA isn't always free trade if the goods are from origin in another country. So since some of these
Senator Arulkumaran unopposed.
How long does it take China to move all their production facilities to Mexico?
It could take like 1 to 2 years, not that long though.
1 to 2 years when they're supplying materials to the whole world. It will take 1 to 2 years to move their production to
They
Mexico.
already have plans. BYD plans to build one by 2026. Like, I'm not sure what you're saying.
They plan to build one facility. How long will it take to actually move all their products?
They don't have to move all their products, just enough to satisfy the US
Then
market.
how else will they get the tariff-free benefits that you champion?
I just told you, they're just going to move it enough
Thank
back.
you, senators. The questioning has elapsed. Affirmative speakers rise. Again, all affirmative speakers, please rise. Seeing
Motion.
Senator Hain.
30-second in-house recess.
Seconds. Any objection? Seconds. Any objections? Seeing none. Okay, 30-second recess.
I thought
We
we
had-
had more apps than negs.
It's
Yeah.
literally it splits. So
Does literally anyone on the app want to go?
Was my speech that unconvincing?
You fellas fine if we just break cycle once and then somebody takes up the mantle for
If you
next
give
half?
me like 1 minute, I can go.
I think that's
there's
worth it.
6 apps. If we break cycle now, we're gonna have to.
All right,
Yeah.
the recess
Let's
has
just-
elapsed, unfortunately. I'm going to call Senator Xiao.
Can we just extend by 1 minute?
Second. Any objections? Seeing none, recess extended by 1 minute.
Wait, real quick, I think Brian said that he could go ahead and give
Yes,
it
that's the
1
point of
minute.
this 1 minute recess, I believe.
Okay. And then I think I can write something up for the next one, unless someone else wants to do it.
Is everyone planning on giving leads?
Wait, for the neg or the AF, Representative Arulkumaran?
Sorry?
Oh, never mind. I meant for the AF.
You're writing the next app cycle?
Yeah. I'm writing after Brian. I'm gonna go. As long as no one else wants to.
Okay, I'm ready to go now. Motion.
Senator Dominguez.
Motion to end the recess early.
Second. Any objections? Seeing none and assuming unanimous consent, we're going to end the recess early. I'm going to call for all affirmation speakers. Senator Dominguez unopposed.
I thank the chair. Good afternoon. That's Representative Dominguez saving debate for the second time. I'll assume my judges are ready. If not, please give me a holler. Great. I'll go ahead and get started. Why reinvent the wheel? It's a question meant to stop progress in its tracks or suggest that what exists is good enough. But history tells a different story. From stone to steel and carts to cars, the wheel was reinvented hundreds of times. If we refuse to challenge what already is, we'll miss the chance to build something better. When no one thinks to reinvent the wheel, misdirection is mistaken for motion. Look, reduce tariffs on Chinese EVs to force American automakers to innovate by increasing competition. First, understand that right now, the American EV industry is stalling because companies see no reason to innovate. Heck, we made the industry's kingpin second in command in the government, let him tweak regulations, undercut competitors, and most outrageously of all, output a $70,000 steel Pentagon and label it the future. Where did it all go wrong? I'll tell you where. We gave them the blueprint to a billion-dollar money machine where they just sit back and get rich. The Harvard Law Review reports on June 23rd, 2023, that government subsidies, tax credits, and regulatory leniency have artificially propped up the EV market, stifling innovation as car makers fail to invest in R&D or deliver new solutions. In turn, that laziness forces us to miss out on a world where EVs are cleaner, cheaper, and more sustainable. The EV industry has been coasting for too long. This bill puts the pedal to the metal. By allowing Chinese EVs to compete with American ones, automakers have to innovate to avoid going under. After all, our sponsor told you that Chinese cars are cheaper and more efficient than American ones. Only research and development can change that. Competition drives innovation. With it comes the next EV revolution. 2 ways how. 1, it improves the industry's mining ethics. I actually agree with Senator Saenz. I think the EV market will take a hit if we pass this bill. But that's a good thing because to regain market share, automakers will do everything they can, including and especially being the most sustainable car in the market, to come back on top. the University of Melbourne in a 2020 paper finds that in a move to address consumer concerns on the ethics of electric batteries, BMW and Tesla are working to find alternative sources to the Congo for lithium-ion batteries. That momentum isn't stopping anytime soon. By putting Tesla in the hot seat, we force automakers to compete on ethics. Pass this bill to free the chains of children across the globe. But secondly, competition lowers prices, offering a pass to a sustainable future. The IEA's 2024 report finds that due to competition between automakers, global EV prices dropped 10% last year. In fact, EV giant in China, BYD, has dropped their prices 20% in just the past 2 years. Be it through streamlining global design or dropping prices, innovation forces us to fight climate change and fight child labor. The wheels will keep turning, with or without us. Now is no
Thank you,
time to
Senator,
slam the
for that
brakes.
speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Xiao unopposed.
Hey, so I'm really confused, right? You want the companies to compete on ethics, but you also want them to lower prices. You want them to upgrade, but you want them to lower prices. Which one is it?
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive.
Why not?
Because you can not use child labor and still turn a profit, and you can use R&D to
second.
lower the prices of your
Wait a
cars.
second. Why are all Chinese EVs so cheap? Because they use
child labor.
You can't
Right.
have your cake and eat it too, right?
So, okay, the only way that American automakers could compete with
Senator
these cheap
Saenz.
prices is by becoming more ethical.
Senator Saenz.
Hi. Why won't American companies still be forced to innovate when Chinese companies enter the market via Mexico?
They're both the same thing. I'd argue this bill just speeds up
but
that
when they're made in
transition.
Mexico, we have oversight and they're not committing human rights
Okay,
abuses.
we don't have oversight, and I still argue
do
that
have
they're going to
oversight
go
under
through
the
Mexico
USMCA.
regardless. No, we can't just peek into Mexico's economy and see whether or not they're using child labor.
Then how have we done it before, right? It's because reports.
We haven't, and we don't.
I gave you an example with the Volkswagen factory.
Wait,
Senators,
Volkswagens
the
are not made in
questioning
Mexico.
block has elapsed. Negation speakers rise. Again, all negation speakers, please rise.
Motion.
Senator Hain.
30-second in-house recess.
Seconds. Okay, there's seconds. Any objections? All right, seeing none and assuming unanimous consent, 30-second in-house recess.
The early round
can
of
step
doom and
up.
despair.
I can step up. I got it.
Cool.
I should be able to go. Motion.
Motion.
Senator Getting.
End the recess early.
Seconds. Any objections? Seeing none and assuming unanimous consent, that recess is over. All right, I'm going to call for all negation speakers. Senator Getting unopposed.
Well, that's Senator Getting, rhymes with betting, although I do not endorse gambling. So, Chair, PO, and Parliamentarian, please just give me an indication if you're ready. And if you don't, I'll just assume that it's good. Cool. Perfect. All right. Assume everyone's good then. The affirmations plan is nothing short of taking a Prius off-road. No GPS, dead battery, and a dream. No matter how much they try and charge it up, no, it's only a matter of time before we're stuck in neutral. Fail, because this legislation only hurts the transition to hybrid vehicles. Senator Dominguez took this debate on a detour, and it's time we get back on the road. I totally agree that EVs are better for the environment than a 1992 Ford F-150. But as my old Prius suddenly came back to life, we might as well throw that argument out the driver's side window. Because under current projections by Reuters in March of 2024, hybrid vehicles are expected to grow 5 times faster than EVs because they're more profitable for manufacturers and $15,000 cheaper for consumers. Senator Dominguez, the industry is innovating. It's just in hybrids. And Senator Adams, the same luxury prices you cite are the #1 reason companies are investing into affordable hybrid alternatives. Without tariffs, American-made hybrids simply can't compete with Chinese EVs. The question of this debate isn't whether we shift gears into drive or reverse, but which version of tomorrow we want to promote. Let me spend the rest of my speech proving why hybrids are the future. Senator Saenz already told you how lithium-ion batteries are personally responsible for child labor, climate change, and the death of my old Prius. But here's the twist. Hybrids actually use fewer batteries. So the Transportation Energy Institute quantified in 2021 that hybrids emit 67% fewer emissions than EVs during the manufacturing process. And it's not just what's under the hood, but where the hood is made. The most popular model, the Toyota RAV4 Hybrid, is made right here in America, which means no tariffs, none of Senator Saenz' child labor concerns, and no coal-powered Chinese manufacturing plants polluting our planet. In fact, the Berkeley Lab for International Energy Analysis found in a 2022 study that Chinese manufacturing emits 23% more carbon dioxide than American manufacturers do because China's power grid relies more heavily on coal. Senator Dominguez and Adams, if you truly care about the environment, you don't take a U-turn into a coal cloud by backing EVs dirtier than hybrids made in our own garage. You don't mind lithium like your warranty is about to expire and reverse every mile of progress we've already driven. And you definitely don't slam the gas on policies that put electric cars in the fast lane while affordability gets left on the shoulder with my old Prius. All in all, the MIT Energy Initiative concludes in a 2019 study that hybrid vehicles actually emit 30% fewer lifetime greenhouse gases than EVs because of a more climate-friendly manufacturing process. As climate change pushes sea levels to new highs, the affirmation only seeks to pour fuel on the already raging fire. We can't afford more hurricanes, more wildfires, more tornadoes across the US. So just like my old Prius, it's time to leave this legislation dead on the side of the road. Take the GPS back to common sense. Negate this legislation.
Speech time 2 minutes, 56 seconds. Questioners rise. That's gonna go to that'll go to Senator Hain.
Hey, in the status quo, are we shifting more towards EVs or hybrids?
Hybrids.
Wait, except how?
There are more hybrids on the road in America than there are EVs
Okay,
by
but
multiple
EVs
factors,
have a
and
specific
innovation's driving 5 times faster than EVs are.
EVs have a specific commercial incentive that makes people want to invest in them. How do we buy that hybrids are the hot topic when they're old news already?
They aren't old news. They're $15,000 cheaper for consumers. Those luxury prices don't apply to
But
hybrid
EVs are
vehicles.
going down in price right now.
Senator Adams.
Hi, Senator. So Senator Saenz pretty convincingly told you that in a status quo world, we're still going to be importing unethical, climate unfriendly EVs that are manufactured by Chinese companies, just ones that are nearshored to Mexico. So why would you discourage American companies from building hybrids and EVs by putting tariffs on batteries and engines?
Because the hybrid vehicles are made right here in the US. They're
With
made in
materials
Kentucky.
from other countries, which are tariffed under your world and not tariffed under the affirmation world.
No, the legislation specifically applies to lithium-ion
Thank you,
batteries for
Senator.
EVs
Questioning
only.
Which don't grow on trees, Senator.
All right, affirmative speakers rise. That's gonna go to Senator Naraine.
All right, I have that speech. Speaking for the second time in today's Legislative Assembly, Representative Naraine. That's Naraine, and I'll begin on my first word. Okay. The automotive industry in the United States supports over 7.5 million jobs across various sectors that include manufacturing, dealerships, and related businesses. It's clear that the auto industry is one of the most important industries for our constituents as it relates to hiring. And it's for that reason that I ask everyone to stand with me and affirm this legislation. Now, I want to take a unique road, and I want to separate myself from every other affirmative speaker. While I agree that in large part, reducing tariffs has positive impacts on reducing climate change and supporting the emergence of cheap electric vehicles, that's not the main reason why you affirm this legislation. The real reason you affirm this legislation is because reducing tariffs is actually the way that we protect the United States auto industry. The fourth whereas clause in this legislation makes a bold but slightly inaccurate claim that tariffs protect the American auto industry. But passing this legislation and reducing tariffs actually accomplishes this outcome even better. Because one of the policy goals of tariffs is to revitalize the United States automobile manufacturing. But economists from the Budget Lab at Yale University has conducted models, and those models show that in the event other countries retaliate tit for tat to the US auto tariffs, the domestic US auto industry actually shrinks. Even under the no retaliation scenario, however, the tariffs reduce the short and long run level of aggregate real GDP, implying that the no retaliation gains to the US auto industry are offset elsewhere with lower output and job losses in other industries. Retaliatory tariffs, which are the most likely outcome, decreases the strength of the auto industry due to a lack of resources, which has the opposite impact of protecting the United States auto industry. So you affirm this legislation to protect the auto industry by giving them affordable inputs that they need to succeed. This also supports Representative Dominguez's argument about innovation, because having cheap and accessible natural resources is actually how we support tech innovation in our economy. But how does economic talk actually impact our constituents? Well, as aggregate real GDP decreases, unemployment increases. And that means that American citizens who work in the auto industry are negatively hurt and are negatively impacted. So when we have high tariffs, we see that those that are working in those industries are being laid off at extremely high levels. But when you pass this legislation and when you reduce the tariff amount to 10%, you have the opposite impact. You increase employment and you increase the GDP of the United States, which supports our constituents. Representatives, you affirm this legislation not because of the impact on climate change, although that's very important, but also because you support our constituents and those in the auto industry. So affirm.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Saenz unopposed.
Hi, so your whole thing is about helping the American car industry, right?
Yeah.
What's going to happen when they now have to compete against the much cheaper Chinese cars?
Well, Representative Dominguez already brought up the argument that that's going to have to force them to innovate, and competition is actually a good thing.
How much does a Chinese BYD cost, right? Like 10K. How much does a Tesla cost? Like 56. Isn't it just
Tesla isn't the only company that makes electric vehicles.
Right.
There
More competition. Why won't it force them to cut workers, cut costs, and actually hurt the industry?
Senator Getting.
Should the US innovate into cheaper, more affordable child labor?
I don't think child labor should be endorsed at all.
Absolutely, but that's what China's doing to make their EVs so cheap. We remove those tariffs or lower them. How is that not endorsing that practice?
Right. So what we have to realize is that, well, it doesn't endorse the practice. It just allows for more competition in the United States.
Yeah,
but
allows more child labor through that practice.
An additional impact, well, everything that we have, the computer or the iPad that you're, doing this on involves some sort of child labor. I don't
think it should.
All right.
It shouldn't, but it does.
Thank you, Senator. The questioning block has elapsed. All negation speakers rise. Again, all negation speakers rise. Senator Dominguez is that
motion. I move to a 30-second in-house recess.
Seconds. Any objections? Seeing none and assuming unanimous consent, 30-second in-house recess.
Guys, who here's on the neg?
There's literally like 4
All
people.
right.
I'm on the neg, but
I'm gonna flip to neg right now. I can give next cycle.
Give this cycle by
Let's
chance.
be cautious about flipping.
I mean, if you give me a minute, I could probably give this neg.
If
Senator Kabra, do you have a speech available at this time?
I'm going on neg.
I know. Do you have the next speech
Unfortunately, the
available?
recess has elapsed. Are there any motions? Senator Dominguez.
I move to extend the recess by 1 more minute.
Second. Any objections? Seeing
Wait,
none.
okay. Sorry. If you're on neg, can you raise your placard? I am too, but wait, David, you're flipping?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Kabra, how soon can you give your speech?
I can give my speech. I can give it this cycle if necessary, but I was just wondering if someone with worse recency might want to, and so that they don't have to flip.
I think we would greatly appreciate if you could give your speech this cycle.
Okay, I'll just give my speech this cycle then.
Are there any motions? Senator Dominguez.
I move to end the recess early.
Any seconds? All right. Any objections? All right. Seeing none, the recess is ended early. I'm going to go ahead and call for negation speakers. Again, all negation speakers. Senator Kabra unopposed.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. Any sign of indication from my PO and judges, and I will get started. All right. America is built on the promise of freedom, and electric vehicles so far have been the innovators towards it. The freedom to move, to dream, and to chase an opportunity from coast to coast while protecting our climate underneath it. But when the cost of transportation becomes a barrier instead of a bridge, we owe it to our constituents to build a better future. You failed today's legislation to protect domestic industry, to protect innovation, and to protect the climate. I think the biggest assumption from the affirmation throughout today's debate has been that it's cleaner and it's able to actually make the environment better when we allow Chinese electric vehicles to enter our market. Now, Representative Getting already told you that the environmental controls in China exist, but are less strictly enforced or monitored, contributing to the polluted waterways, hazardous waste, and, as Brookings reports in 2025, severe air quality issues near mining and processing sites. But Representative Adams tells you that China would offshore to Mexico instead of doing that, making the environmental impact null. Here's the thing. When a rapid influx of cheap carbon-intensive Chinese electric vehicles reduces the pressure on US manufacturers to decarbonize their own supply chains at a time where the United States is already loosening its environmental protections, we make the very process of EV production less clean in our own country. As the Associated Press reports just last month, the dismantling or weakening of 31 key environmental standards that previously required pollution controls for automakers is occurring in the status quo. That means when China is using its shortcuts to make its process faster, but also emit more greenhouse gases, we are enabling US countries to do the same. This isn't competition driving innovation, Representative Dominguez. It's a race to the bottom, and the prize is more pollution. Why build the future when you can just import it, along with 600 grams of coal-based CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour? So what's the real innovation we need to protect in today's debate? My side has already told you about domestic production and industry, but I want to tell you why that matters against China. Representative Adams, you tell us that these tariffs prevent us from getting those parts that we need, including lithium-ion batteries. Two responses. One, we're diversifying, and two, that actually leads to more innovation. In fact, as the American Energy Society reported in 2023, China produced 60% of the world's flake graphite in 2023. But by 2033, this is estimated to fall to 39% as supply from Mozambique, Madagascar, and Tanzania ramps up. And even further, US companies like Ascend Elements are commercializing breakthrough recycling technology that produces 99.9% pure graphite. Innovations in synthetic graphite production, battery recycling, and advanced purification technologies enable a much lower environmental footprint than traditional mining and coal-based Chinese production. Let's not short circuit in American innovation.
For that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds, questioners rise. That'll go to Senator Rye.
Your argument is that US automakers benefit under tariffs, right?
I'm telling you that passing today's legislation would incentivize them to get lazy about environmental protections and controls.
Why would it get lazy? Are US environmental regulations changing in any way under this policy?
I just told you that they are. There's the weakening of 31 key environmental standards under today's administration.
Wait, that happens regardless, right? In any case, wouldn't it create jobs to pass this legislation if we agree?
I'm saying when we're introducing cheaper Chinese vehicles that do this, we're also incentivizing American companies to do
just because you have an extra competitor in the market, are you allowed to break the law?
No, but I'm saying that it incentivizes them to go further and make their process even.
Wait, these are for-profit companies. They already have their laws like right where they need to be. They can't change that.
Okay, if their competitor is able to produce cheaper vehicles, they want to do the same.
Right. Doesn't that force them to invest into R&D to come up with cheaper solutions?
No, it doesn't. That forces
Why
them
not?
to cut costs.
How do you cut costs with R&D? You can't just lower your profit margins. You have to invest in innovation.
The questioning block has elapsed. I'm going to call on affirmation speakers. Senator Rye, unopposed.
I thank the chair. Hi, everyone. That's Senator Rye, spelled R-A-I, once again. Assuming everyone's ready, I'm good to go. Okay, I don't see anyone hollering, so I'll start. In an effort to connect with younger Americans, I recently scrolled on Twitter to see what they think of this chamber. And even if us old folks might not like it, they call this quite childish. And I'd agree. I think the negation has been watching too much wheels on the bus go round and round. Because the only thing this chamber's been doing is going in circles. I want to straighten out this debate and drive America to a better place with this policy. Pass not only sponsor a more renewable future, but one that keeps more Americans alive. First, I think we need to desperately change how we view tariffs. Everyone in the negation, from Senator Saenz to Senator Kabra, have all given you the same version, the same argument. American tariffs are reducing how much products we buy from China by making them more expensive. But the thing is, tariffs are not nearly as productive as they tell you. As Financial Times reported just last March, even with Biden-era tariffs, the US bought 114% more batteries, more solar panels, and yes, more Chinese cars directly from China. Why? Because they produce 97% of the rare earth minerals and products necessary to build those things. No matter how much you tariff them, we are paying that price anyways. The ship of America should manufacture its own cars has long sailed. The question we should be asking is if we want to buy China's cheapest options or pay the price on our own. But therein, I want to be the first in this debate to look past the manufacturing one. I think whether you buy Senator Adams, Naraine, or Dominguez, who says this boosts American manufacturing, or believe Senator Liz and Kabra, who say every single American household will buy a BYD, both sides agree that there will be more EVs on the road, whether they're Chinese or American. I want to spend the rest of my speech showing you that no matter who builds the EVs, that is a good thing to have more of them on the road. As the University of Houston quantified in June of 2024, just a 30% increase in EV usage in cities like LA, something they predict would happen if either A, like the affirmative says, Americans produce more EVs, or B, like the negation says, at least in more Chinese EVs, you could prevent 104 deaths from pollution every single month in one city alone. This wins this debate because it shows no matter who makes the cars, lowering tariffs will save lives. It doesn't matter who is in charge of manufacturing, American or Chinese, so long as American lives are saved in the process. But if you're still worried about jobs, the jobs lost in the EV market can be replaced by solar, which is expanded under this policy. As the Interstate Renewable Energy Council found in 2022, the solar industry creates over 9,000 jobs every year, while the EV market is cutting jobs because they're trying to automate. They predict by lowering tariffs and making solar more affordable, 17% of more Americans can afford and build solar, creating thousands of more jobs from construction. Passing doesn't just save lives, but make better livelihoods. Our future isn't child's play. Protect our children's future and pass this policy.
All right, speech time 3 minutes 7 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go between Senator Saenz, Getting, and Kabra. That's going to go to Senator Kabra.
Hi.
Hey, what's better, EVs that are cleaner to produce or EVs that aren't?
I told you EVs, no matter who makes them, are better for the environment and better for our people.
But if by failing this legislation, we can have EVs on the road that are cleaner, isn't that better than that?
They're more expensive. No one can buy them. People die from pollution.
Okay, what's stopping us from offering tax credits or things in the future to incentivize
we
EV?
Tried that, and you put tariffs because we realized it wasn't enough to stop China or match their potential.
In the past, did tax credits encourage people to
Senator
buy?
Ostheimer.
Hey, you tell us that Chinese rare earth minerals are going to be carbon intensive either way, right?
I'm saying we're dependent on China for them.
Right. Isn't the solution becoming less dependent?
That's one way, or because pollution is a short-term issue, you can buy the rare earth minerals and save people's lives from using EVs.
I don't know if pollution is a short-term issue. Why would we pass this bill if it necessarily means staking our future on Chinese rare earth mineral extraction?
I prove to you, we are buying more and more every single day, whether you pass or fail. You might as well get
Thank you, Senators. The questioning block has elapsed. Senator Arulkumaran, are you good now? Your Wi-Fi crashed. Is it like still laggy or are you good
No,
now?
I think it's fine now. I think it was just for a second, but I'm sorry about that.
All good. All right. I'm going to go ahead and continue. Negation speakers, please rise. Again, Senator Ostheimer, or between Senator Xiao and Senator Ostheimer, will go to Senator Ostheimer.
I thank the chair. Hi, my name is Senator Nicholas Ostheimer. Judges and PO, please give me a heads up if you're not ready. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and begin this negation. If humanity ever unites to save our planet from global warming, the solution will not be dreamt up by businessmen, lobbyists, and Congress, whether they're in Manhattan or Beijing. fail this legislation because depending on China's auto industry and America's energy grid to save our planet is exactly as counterproductive as it sounds. First, let me be the first to take a close look at the Chinese EV industry in the first place. According to the Center for European Policy Analysis in October of 2023, in China, building an EV creates 37% more emissions than a gasoline car. 43% of that carbon footprint comes from the battery, which requires Chinese manufacturers to extract millions of tons of rare earth minerals. Senator Rai just told you that's not unique, but it isn't. Batteries uniquely take an order of magnitude more REMs to manufacture than internal combustion engine vehicles. According to NPR in May of 2025, Chinese manufacturers are building EVs at less than half the production cost of American manufacturers. That's exactly why Senator Adams correctly claims this bill would make Chinese EVs ubiquitous in America. But Senator Dominguez and Naraine think American manufacturers will innovate because of competition. Senators, if American EVs are more than twice as expensive to build, competition will lead manufacturers like Tesla and Hyundai to bankruptcy long before innovation. So when Chinese EVs do come to America, they'll be powered by our energy grid. According to the IMF on January 30th of 2024, according to the US Energy Information Administration, fossil fuels account for roughly 60% of our energy grid. On top of catastrophically higher manufacturing emissions, EVs in America would be powered with 60% coal, natural gas, and petroleum. So, ironically, this bill combines the worst of both worlds. China's EV, battery, and solar supply chain, which emits billions of tons of CO2 more than peer countries, and America's energy grid, where fossil fuels reign supreme thanks to $757 billion in fossil fuel subsidies from this very government. We use the most carbon-intensive supply chain in the world to build electric vehicles for the most carbon-intensive electricity grid in the world. If Senator Adams's goal was maximizing carbon emissions worldwide, this bill would be a pretty good start. But let me be the first in today's debates to explain exactly what is at stake when you pass this bill. According to NOAA in 2022, if American emissions continue to grow at the current rates, tens of millions of Americans in Miami, Hawaii, California's Bay Area, or North Carolina's Outer Banks will be displaced by 2050 because of sea level rise. Senator Dominguez and Naraine, is it worth it to sacrifice the American auto industry and the millions of jobs it creates to the gods of free trade just for emissions to continue growing unchecked? I think not.
Speech time 2 minutes 54 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Naraine.
Great speech, Representative. You talk about how basically these companies are going to become bankrupt. But when the cost of inputs decreases for companies in the United States in order to build EVs, what is the result?
Well, the cost of inputs doesn't matter when it remains dramatically cheaper to manufacture the final product in China, the EV.
Right. At the end of the day, though, if the inputs are lower, it's going to make it easier for American companies to build those EVs.
As true as that is, China will simply stop trading those
Senator
components to America
Arulkumaran.
to protect its own industry.
So what is comparatively worse, the manufacturing and usage of gas cars or the manufacturing and usage of EVs?
It depends on where they're manufactured and used.
Okay, so let's say that they're manufactured inside the US in both cases. Which one would be worse?
EVs manufactured in the US are comparatively better than gas cars manufactured in the US, but
Okay,
not better than.
so when you pass this legislation and you reduce tariffs on raw materials, doesn't that give these EV companies more opportunities to build domestically?
I just told Senator Naraine that
Senators,
China
you
will
may be
protect its auto.
seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, all negation speakers rise. Senator Naraine, is that a placard for this?
No, sorry, it was left up.
All right, then that's going to go
Point of
to
order.
Senator. Sorry, who said that? I couldn't hear you.
I did, Representative Arulkumaran.
All right, what was that? What did you say? Could you repeat?
I thought Representative Ostheimer's speech was in negation, so this would be an affirmative speech.
Oh, my apologies. Then we're going to call for affirmative speakers. All affirmative speakers, please rise. That's going to go to Senator Hain.
Howdy. That's Representative Hain, still spelled Hain. At least that's what my birth certificate says. Printed on that placard. This is an affirmation once more. Affirmation. I'll take a hoot and holler or anything else if anybody's not ready. Cool. In biblical legend, young David defeats Goliath, the giant, with nothing but a pebble and slingshot. Impressive, sure. But honestly, I think things would have worked better for both parties if they just hired a social worker. I get that this Congress is angry at China. Trust me, I share the same rage. But instead of mindlessly throwing pebbles at each other, let's just get a group therapist. Pass. To get Xi Jinping to finally talk about his feelings. Representatives Ostheimer and Kabra on the negation fearmonger about the attack of the Chinese EVs and say they're going to absolutely flood the market. That isn't true. As the University of Chicago reports in June of 2024, when tens of thousands of Americans were polled if they'd choose a cheap Chinese EV or an American EV, 60% of them stuck with the American EV. Why? Representative Ostheimer, American consumers would be trusting the country that gave them broken Furbies and glass that was destroyed on delivery. In the American eye, cheap Chinese material is synonymous with bad Chinese material. Clean Technica furthers in April 2025 that the biggest players in EVs, Tesla, Ford, and BMW, are all in it because of brand recognition. Representative Kabra, cheesehead Elon isn't going anywhere anytime soon. He's a staple of the American public, and no amount of Chinese influence is going to detract from his own worth. That means that we see a balance in Chinese EVs. Representatives Kabra and Gedding's advocacies fall on themselves and drive themselves into the ground like Representative Gedding's Prius. They coexist with one another. The cars from America and the cars from China. And that means, Representative Ostheimer, we don't flood the grid with EVs, we just add more. That's not enough to completely break the system because more EVs are being added regardless because more companies are innovating. But then Representatives Ostheimer and Saenz bring up a completely different salient point, that Chinese manufacturing isn't that great. And I agree, except this isn't the time to start a new barrage of pebbles. It's the time to cooperate. Put down the eagle in interest of the dove, because right now, our climate regulations with China are crumbling. As Climate Home News reports 2 days ago, American isolationism has started breaking American and Chinese climate change reduction pacts. Representative Ostheimer, that doesn't only affect the road, that affects the entire world, as you say. Which is why Representative Adams wins this debate in the first cycle of the round. Because as Reuters reports in November of 2024, cooperation between China and America on reducing climate change can reduce both of their emissions by 30% by 2035. I get cooperating with the big bad bully is scary, but sometimes we need to put down our pebbles and say, I love to work with you. Pass.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes, 10 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go between all those standing. That's going to go to Senator, that'll go to Senator Saenz.
Hey.
Hi, why isn't it better for Americans to just buy Chinese EVs made in Mexico as opposed to them buying from them made in China with exploitative labor?
I don't really think it makes a difference when we reduce CO2 on nets.
So it doesn't make a difference if the car is being made by Uyghur Muslims who are being exploited?
Literally everybody in this round has given you statistics on why climate change is going to ravage the earth. And
Yeah,
Representative Dominguez already, if I could answer your question, Representative Dominguez already told you that the USMCA has less tariffs.
Senator Gedding.
Still going to be made there. Hey.
I'm all good for a nice therapy session, but how is therapy going to help stop child labor and climate change emissions in China?
Let's do some box breathing. Tariffs don't eliminate child labor. It happens regardless. The important thing is making sure CO2 is reduced independent of that.
Yes, but tariffs make it so child labor is discouraged compared to other forms.
China's not going to magically stop using it. We're not going to change their heart by a snap of the fingers.
But people stop buying it.
The question,
I thank the chair.
The chair thanks you. Negation speakers rise. That's going to go to Senator Xiao unopposed.
Hey everyone, for the second time today, that's Senator Xiao, Xiao. I'll just take silence as an indication that you're ready. Perfect. This debate reminds me a lot of the glory days of talk show television, because the affirmation really sounds like Oprah Winfrey. Senator Dominguez thinks that when we pass, I'll look under my seat as he flips his hair and says, "You get a Tesla, you get a Tesla, everyone gets a Tesla." But sorry, Senator Dominguez, your talk show dreams are going to have to wait, because every electric car you give your constituents brings us a century closer to the cusp of climate change. Don't let that become a reality and fail this legislation. Now, in this debate, both sides agree climate change is the core issue we have to solve. Where we disagree is whether this bill makes it easier or harder for us to finish the race. Let me show you that increasing our usage of EVs is devastating for our chances against climate change, even with the benefits that increased solar and lithium battery access may provide, like Senator Rye tells us. Fail this legislation because it worsens our dependency on cars, the single biggest contributor to transportation carbon emissions. Now, I agree with Senator Adams and Dominguez over Senator Ostheimer. EVs may be better than consumption engines, but the question isn't whether cars should run on electricity or gas. It's whether we should increase dependence on cars, period. And the answer is no, because when we depend on cars, we abandon public transportation. For example, Senator Adams says EVs become cheaper under this bill, and Senator Dominguez says that they'll become even more accessible when American companies innovate to lower prices. But Energy Mix tells us in November of 2023 that after Norway implemented EV subsidies, EV purchases shot up, but its railroads and bus ridership went down. America is trying to transition to public transportation, but when our constituents can buy EVs for the same amount as a year worth of subway tickets, it gets abandoned. And all the progress we have made goes out of the window. And that's devastating because World Resource Institute reports in December of 2023 that buses and trains can reduce greenhouse gas emissions 66% better compared to private vehicles, electric or gas, which means every point the affirmation has made falls to the negation. Senator Hain, Dominguez, and Rye want EV ridership to go up, but they don't realize governments will build highways instead of busways to facilitate that increase. That means more construction that contributes greater to a crippling climate. That's why Sightline Institute reports constructing 1 lane of 1 mile of highway emits up to 2,300 tons of carbon. Then, Senator Adams already agreed with me that EV companies will invest in EV chargers, but Sustainable Cities and Societies Research Journal tells us in their December 2024 issue that EV adoption amplifies transport-related social inequalities, especially strategies that emphasize a shift from personal to public and shared transportation. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if EVs emit 10, 20, 30 times less carbon, because Huawei or Honda, car dependency is devastating for climate change, and that's a world I will not stand for. So don't and fail.
Speech time 3 minutes 9 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Hain.
Wait, so in the status quo, are we shifting away from cars to trains?
Yeah.
Wait, but Tesla's only getting more popular, such as other
I
things
have a
like
list
Ford
for
and
you.
BMW.
Atlanta has a brand new bus line. Boston, railroads, subways, Chicago just put $300 million into subways.
Why can't both of those things exist in tandem?
Because when we increase EV ridership, those governments are going to turn away from public transportation into building highways.
Okay, but those governments have already started investing in the projects. Are they going to
Right, and
abandon
they're
it
going to turn
in
away when
mid?
they lose ridership.
Senator Adams.
Thank you. Senator, how many US counties have at least one subway station, roughly?
I'm not sure. I'm sure a lot.
About 25. How many US counties are there?
A lot. Okay, but here's the
3,114.
point I'm making, right? All of the local governments that don't have public transportation in the status quo are moving towards it. I literally just gave you.
That's just not true. I
When
mean,
we
in
prove
rural
to them-
Kentucky,
when we
they're
prove to them-
not
sorry, I
closer
can
to
finish.
having
I can
high-speed
finish.
rail than
when
anywhere
we
else.
prove to them that our people won't ride their railroads, they want to drive
By
Tesla,
maintaining the status
aren't going
quo?
to move towards public transportation.
All right, seeing as that was a speech in the negation, all affirmative speakers rise. That's going to go to Senator Arulkumaran unopposed.
Thank you so much. Once again, Senator Arulkumaran, Arulkumaran, might be the last speech of the round if the wonderful Representative Nichol does not show up, which would be unfortunate, but very happy to give this speech. So just please interrupt me if you're not ready, my judges, PO, competitors, but If I get no interruptions, I'd be happy to start. Okay, looks good. I used to love arguing with Representative Hain on late night drives. He would blame the Tesla, and I would blame his driving. It's only after I got behind the wheel myself that I realized maybe he isn't the best driver. However, if we don't pass today, there won't be any EVs left to drive, or rather, blame. Pass this legislation. Now, Representative Saenz kicked off the negation advocacy by telling you that China is going to move to Mexico. He gave you the who, what, where, and why. But he forgot something. When? CNBC explains on June 22nd of 2025 that it would take China 5 to 10 years to move their facilities to Mexico to get the tariff-free benefits. Representative Saenz, even if it is preferable to have these cars built in Mexico, your benefits are decades away. You pass this legislation instead for the short term because we need to help American businesses make EVs affordable. As Joseph Stiglitz articulates, that our tariffs have doubled the price of raw materials per electric vehicle from $4,000 to $8,000. Not only does that mean that Elon Musk can't run for presidency in 2028, hashtag fall of the American party, but it also has more grave impacts on our country as a whole. When costs go up, American businesses take that money from their bottom line. Domestic production. Eric Rignot, scientist at the Institute for Energy Research Furthers on August 1st of 2024, Tesla, Rivian, and Ford had to pause over 10 innovation and expansion plans to make up for tariff-induced losses. When you pass this legislation, when our tariffs fall, our businesses can rise. Representative Saenz, Kabra, and Ostheimer, when you drop tariffs on raw materials, that puts more money in the pockets of American EV companies. That means that EV companies can finally expand domestic facilities and build vehicles domestically. Representative Kabra and Ostheimer, we aren't endorsing Chinese EVs, but rather American EVs, which, as you agreed, Representative Ostheimer, are comparatively better than gas vehicles. But Representative Getting takes a completely different angle, explaining to us that hybrids are better than EVs. Now, normally, I would race you, your Prius, my Tesla, in which I would probably leave you in a dust cloud. But in this case, I just think it doesn't matter. Because if hybrids are as affordable as you say, Representative Getting, then they will still be competitive. What we are doing in this legislation isn't making EVs better than gas cars. The fight isn't between EVs and hybrids, but it's between EVs and gas cars. This legislation wins that fight, and that's so crucial. Because Representative Xiao, these EVs are much, much better than any gas vehicle and public transit as a whole. As the US EPA contextualizes, on January 1st of 2025, EVs could reduce emissions by up to 70%, saving lives every single day. Each American deserves to live in a planet that is clean and supports their livelihood. They should be able to go outside and get a breath of fresh air. It's because this legislation preserves that. I'm so proud to pass. Thank you.
Speech time 3 minutes, 10 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Dominguez.
Hi, I'm on your side. I just wanted to clarify one thing.
Sure.
This competition that we're talking about between American and Chinese automakers, is it possible that this is going to lead to less child labor and also cheaper EVs?
Yes, because with competition, that not only drives down prices, but it forces more ethical sources of labor.
So the American consumer is more likely to buy a car that is ethically sourced?
That's right. Americans care a lot about ethics, and that's why they would buy a car that's more ethical.
Okay, so is this going to also hurt Chinese automakers, or is it more going to help?
So does it emit more carbon to mine lithium, mine cobalt, and then put together a car, or does it emit more to just take the bus?
Well, fundamentally, one other thing that I wanted to address is the demographic of people that take public transit.
Answer my question. It's pretty simple. Does it cost more to make a car, or does it cost more to take the bus?
Even if it was electrical vehicles, low-income individuals in America take public transit. Middle-income individuals afford electric vehicles and private
accessible
vehicles.
for them to buy a vehicle. When they can buy vehicles, they turn away from public transit, and you emit so much more.
Individuals are already not buying vehicles.
All right. Are there any motions for a recess?
Motion.
Senator Dominguez.
I motion for a 5-minute recess?
Sure. Or indefinite.
Or an indefinite recess.
All right. Second. Any objections? Seeing none. All right. Are there any motions?
Motion.
Senator Dominguez.
I move to end the indefinite recess.
Seconds.
Second.
Okay. Any objections? Seeing none, the indefinite recess is over. I'm going to call for all negation speakers. Senator Nichol unopposed.
I have that speech. Thank you. I'll assume that all judges are ready and probably waiting for a while. Sorry about that, guys. If y'all can hear me okay, if there aren't any problems like that, I'll go ahead and get started. Check, check, check. All right. We've heard a lot of discussion about electric vehicles and the future of climate action in our country and across the world. But I think one of the things we're failing to realize is that electric vehicles are not a mechanism to help reduce climate change and combat carbon emissions for one particular reason. They rely solely on consumer choices. And the problem with this is twofold. First, consumers are not a monoculture. And there can be a lot of differences between what people want, particularly in a type of car. And when we think about this, we also have to understand that a lot of people have very strong opinions about cars. I mean, I'm sure we all understand that family member that's owned a Ford since the Model T was invented, and they're never going to buy any other brand other than that. And the same way that that philosophy is ingrained in some consumers, there's also a certain bias towards electric vehicles. For instance, I'm from the South, and in the South, we have a lot of cultural tendencies to not really like progress and innovation. And unfortunately, I think a lot of my constituents would, well, for lack of a better word, call electric vehicles queer. And they wouldn't buy them. And I think the problem with this is that the whole mechanism of this bill relies on Americans buying electric vehicles, particularly foreign electric vehicles. We're combining that now too when Americans already want to try to buy more American-made products. So we have two different consumer taboos that are being exponentially calculated on top of one another. And that's why this bill fails, because it doesn't actually have the solvency that many on the affirmation see in it. Because when consumers don't buy electric vehicles because of biases they have or any other stupid reason, quite frankly, you don't get solvency for this bill. And in the status quo, we don't see people buying electric vehicles nearly on the frequency we need them to be buying those vehicles. And here's the real solution, because I understand that I can't just come to you with a critique. The real way we actually help climate action is we realize that when 100% or the top 100 global corporations produce 70% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, what we need is actual governmental and interagency regulations on these companies. What we need is broad climate accords like the Paris Climate Accord. But unfortunately, Trump already pulled us out of that once again for the second time. And this is the problem. All of the actual climate solvency is locked behind international cooperation. And this tariff system doesn't get that for us either. So what we need to do is actually place regulations on corporations, on how they produce power, on where they distribute waste. We need to regulate the people that are actually destroying the planet with regulations that are enforceable, that are guaranteed to have results. We cannot rely on consumer choices to save us, because the truth is the consumers didn't get us into this mess in the first place. It was big oil companies and CEOs. That's how we fight climate change. We pass regulations that make effective change instead of putting the burden on the consumer. Thank you.
Speech time 3 minutes, 7 seconds. Questioners rise. That's going to go to Senator Naraine.
All right, great speech, Representative. This legislation isn't stopping people from buying or continuing to buy regular cars, isn't that correct?
No.
All right, so what's the problem with this legislation?
Well, the problem is it's not addressing what the actual problem with climate solvency is, and that's effective regulations on corporations. And before you say, then what's the harm? The problem is we can't just continue to pass ineffective legislation and tell our constituents that we're doing something to address the climate problem.
Okay, EVs are
that's
better.
governmental erosion.
EVs are better than...
Senator Ryan.
Your main argument is that not all Americans want Chinese-made EVs, right?
Absolutely.
What matters more to the American consumer, their political identity or getting a car that's thousands of dollars cheaper?
Well, unfortunately, I think a lot of times we see people make decisions that are against their own interests, particularly in politics.
When a majority of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, if a car is thousands of dollars cheaper, wouldn't they want to buy it?
I'm not sure if it's a foreign Chinese. I mean, people literally make jokes
I
about
am
like
on the
cheap.
risk of bankruptcy. Would I not always pick the cheaper option?
Thank you,
Listen.
senators. The questioning block has elapsed. Since we've exhausted all speakers, I'm going to unilaterally move to previous question on this bill for EVs. All those wishing to pass the legislation, please raise a hand, placard, or virtual hand, either of them. All right. I'll give a sec. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think there should be 6 potentially. I may be. Okay. I see 5. One. So. Oh, sorry. Senator Hain. My apologies. 1, 2, 6. All right. All those wishing to fail today's legislation, please raise a placard. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What? Hold on. My math is off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Senator Saenz. All right. On a vote to 6 to 6, I get to decide whether we pass or fail today's legislation, and I'm going to choose to pass today's legislation. Congratulations to the sponsor, Senator Adams. Are there any motions?
Motion.
Dominguez.
I move to adjourn.
Seconds? Any objections? All right, seeing none, we're adjourned. Great job, everyone.
You'll be able to see all my in-depth feedback actually in your. I basically just attached to Google a link to the Google Doc that I created for you all. You'll see that the way that I structure my notes for the purpose of my own flowing is also I'll write out pretty much the arguments, some of the war, and some of the impacts that you have, and then make sure I understand it. At the very bottom of each of the speech, like I guess flows is going to be like an overarching like hey, this is something that you need to work on, or you did this well, so you'll have a pretty high level understanding of how that speech went. Within that, you'll also see some feedback or some questions I might have as you give your speech. I'm going to start with just general feedback in terms that aren't necessarily argument based, but more like speech structure, refutation structure, and things like that. To give you all a little bit of context, I'm a head coach for Illinois Math and Science Academy. I used to teach for William. I used to coach for William from high school as well. I started their Congress program back when I was in high school, and then now they're, I don't know, they're a good school, I guess. I've been coaching for quite a while, coached throughout college and did a bunch of summer camps and have been judging pretty much since I graduated. So I've seen a lot of debaters. I've seen actually quite a lot of you, and awesome to see you all here, and also to be able to get feedback. It's such a good representation for a lot of students across this country who are going to utilize you guys as examples in terms of what debate should look like. So all in all, I want to say great job, proud of all of you. Thanks for spending your Saturday doing this all with all of us too. There are some really important things that I think that probably need to be talked about. I'm a believer that how we do things during practice should also be done. It should reflect how we're going to do things in person. I know that realistically, this is something that's over the summer and something that's virtual. But even in virtual competitions, it's important to me that how you are delivering your speeches, in my opinion, there really shouldn't be much that's like pre-written. It should be pretty extemporaneous, mainly because that's how you're actually going to do things in real life, right? You're not going to go to the TOC final round and then read off your whole speech. Otherwise, you wouldn't have made it to the final round and probably had not have made it to TOC, to be fair. For that reason, a lot of my feedback is going to be with the caveat that that's something that I think everybody should really focus on, even in a virtual setting. But let's talk through speeches. I think there are different parts of speech structure. There's your claim, data, warrant, impact. More importantly, on the affirmative side, what you're advocating for is right that the bill, passing the bill and having those actions, a specific plan of action, be enacted is going to cause some sort of good for a group of people, right? On the next side, it's important that you have some sort of net negative, meaning that if we pass this bill, there's going to be some sort of consequence that is going to worsen our status quo, not just make it mute or not important, right? That's really important because if you're saying that we shouldn't pass this bill just because it's not going to do anything, that's not a good enough reason for me to say, oh, that's a bad idea. When all of the affirmative speakers are telling you this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, these people are going to benefit. It just isn't a strong argument. So that's something that I want you to fundamentally remember. More importantly, when we are advocating for either side, right, what we need to do is tie back the legislation. I think very few times did I actually hear clear explanations as to, for example, in the Myanmar argument, how military and humanitarian aid is going to help solve some sort of conflict. Most people are just saying, oh, it's going to worsen the status quo or it's going to worsen the situation, but how, I have no idea.
So it's really important we tie back legislation, tie back the plans of action of the bill into our warranting process so that when we get to the impact, it's clear to me that there is a causational relationship between this bill passing and this consequence happening or whatever impact that you're bringing up happening, right? Otherwise, it's all correlation. I don't buy it. And that was a big challenge that I think I had throughout a good amount of the arguments, actually, is there just wasn't really enough solvency that made it somewhat difficult. I think a good example is on the is on the EV bill. Both the on the aft side, you're basically saying that domestic like EV companies are going to have like be forced to innovate, be forced to compete. And the next side, you're saying, on the next side, okay, there are a bunch of different arguments on the next side. But one thing I was curious about, right, is it feasible for domestic EV companies to be even able to innovate while still being profitable and not losing their companies, right? I think was addressed later on in the debate that those companies may not have the resources to do that, right? Which is, I think, really important. But on both sides, we're just making the assumption, hey, EV companies are going to be forced to do this, right? While not addressing potentially like the other detrimental impacts. There's no solvency in my mind, or there wasn't a lot of solvency, which made it really hard for me to necessarily buy arguments. So when you look at the feedback, or if you're watching the recording and you're looking at feedback, you'll be able to see that in a good amount of the questions that I have within people's speeches. I think impact. So stylistically, as speakers, all of you are really, really strong speakers. I don't think anybody was super fast. I don't think anybody had too many like fluency breaks or anything like that. I think all of you are really talented speakers, and the use of rhetoric is also really strong. One of the things that I want to encourage you to do, though, is don't necessarily let rhetoric replace the need for good argumentation. Meaning that although you can say a lot of really nice things that sound really good, when I'm listening to the actual evidence that you're bringing up, or when I'm listening to the rhetoric that you're using, or when you're refuting other speakers, what they're like, when you're reiterating what other speakers are saying before refuting, a lot of it is like plagued by just nice words, maybe big words, without actually saying a true point or a reason why they're wrong, right? I think in a few different examples, I pretty much gave the feedback. Saying, no, that's not true is not an actual argument to me, right? You have to prove to me what isn't true and why it isn't true. On the refutation note, in my opinion, that we have got into a little bit of a habit, especially later on in the speeches on both bills, like the later that we developed. Reputations turned a little weak. It's important to me that in order for me to count a reputation for you in comparison to a name drop, you need to prove to me you understand the other person's argument. It means that you give me a quick summary of pretty much what the other person said, whether it's like a warn or if you're doing impact calculus, right? What their impact was, and then counter it with your information, right? Not just saying, oh no, like this isn't true, or Representative or Senator Rye, like, and then spiel off whatever like else you're talking about in terms of your warn and impact, right? It's important that we have that clash that's clear, and the only way to show me that that clash is clear is by providing some sort of warrant. Because I'm not gonna, as I'm listening to your speech, I'm not gonna go up all the way into my flow and look like, oh, I don't know, Representative Saenz's first contention was this and second contention was this. Oh, this is probably what they were refuting, right? I shouldn't need to make that burden as a judge. I think it should be best if it's done by you all, to make it easy and clear for the judges to be able to judge you. This was a lot. I think that's a lot of areas of improvement that I've necessarily given you all. I don't think it accentuates or explains how well all of you all did as well. Like I said at the very beginning, all of you are really good examples of what debate should look like. Just some small things that I think are important to make in the judge's mind as they're listening to each of your speeches, right? Your job should be to make it as easy as possible for me to listen to what you're saying, to believe what you're saying, and then to also not believe what everybody else is saying, right? The easier you make that for me, the less I have to think like externally, and the more I can focus on, wow, this person's an amazing debater. So that I think is all of my areas of feedback. Any questions for me? You'll see the other feedback in your own individual notes, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
I had a question for
Yeah.
you, sir. Okay, so when it comes to like kind of explaining the other person's argument and then refuting it, how in depth do you think that explanation should be?
It doesn't need to be that in depth. One of the things that I hate in like hearing in congressional debate are overgeneralizations, though. So if you're just saying like Senator Adams is saying that EV production in the U.S. is bad, right? That is a not a good enough explanation because there are reasons why Adams would have said that, right? Give me a quick summary of what that reason is. It doesn't need to be super complex, right? But it should be more or less a counterpoint or something that you can outweigh whenever you're actually going to your side of the refutation. So it doesn't need to be super in depth, but avoid generalizations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, right.
I had a question. So how, like you mentioned the late round, we should be interacting, refuting, but also like be aware that like the arguments have been made before. So how would you suggest we balance not rehashing but still addressing like the stock arguments that everyone's been talking about?
Let me ask the question to clarify your question. Are you talking about not rehashing? So are you talking about refutations or are you talking about like arguments, like contentions?
Like refutations, how do you like address those arguments without sounding like you're rehashing, if that makes sense?
It depends. There are different speech structures, right? You have crystal speeches, you have refutation speeches, sponsorships, first cons, and then all the speeches in between, right? So it can kind of depend. If you're doing a crystal, for example, or if you're doing a refutation speech, odds are somebody's already made that sort of refutation, right? It's still important that you probably address basically where the flow had done. I think Xiao had a good example of that later on, I think for the EV bill, as she was a later speaker. You address and recognize where the flow of the debate has been going, right? But then you find a way to extend the argument or to say like reiterate an impact, or I don't know, bring up something, bring up a new impact or new like new perspective of things. For example, I think, who was it? Who was it? Give me 1 second. Well, I guess Hain did a good job bringing up like public transit, right? Something that's brand new, but she was still able to incorporate what other speakers have said in through the flow of the debate, and then bring up something new, right? That's one of the ways to avoid rehashing. For the most part, you can just think if you're going to bring something up, it better be something that's new, but you can still summarize something. You can still summarize how things have been going so far, so that the flow makes sense to people. And I think some of you did a really good job of balancing like combining what other speakers have said because they were all saying similar points, just with different evidence, different warrants. That's okay, so long as the main point isn't lost. And again, you're extending. Did you have a question? Oh no, is that Hain? Yeah.
At what point does a lot of rhetoric become too much rhetoric?
So this is my belief, and this is what I teach too. First, fundamentally, your speech needs to have all of the components together. Your link chains need to be solid. Anything on top of that, your link chains need to be solid, and your impacts need to be developed out. Once all that's done, you add a million different pieces of rhetoric, and you can fit it into a speech, and I can still hear without you speaking as fast as LDers or public formers or policy people. Then, like, you're golden in my eyes. It makes you look better. However, when there are missing pieces in your warrants, in your impacts, maybe your evidence doesn't actually support your claim, right? When there's something that is missing that's a part of a core fundamental part of your contention, that's where I have issue because then it just seems like it's being masked by nice words.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great questions. Sweet. Looking forward to seeing you all soon, unless if some of you are seniors, good luck in life. I know you're going to be great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. If any other judges would want to go next, I guess they can go next. And okay, so overall, I thought this was once again a very good round. I will say my biggest note, I will echo the previous judge. So introduction to myself, I am a former congressional debater. I competed at NSDA Nats in my junior year. Qualified to TOC, didn't go to TOC. I'm from Florida, and I'm currently a student at Northwestern. I have not debated since the 2022 to 23 school year, so I really don't have much experience with like debate post AI. But one thing I do want to note with that is that I'm old. I didn't have access to these tools nearly as much as you guys do. And obviously, I'm not going to be the person to tell you to write your speeches with AI. I'm not going to be the one to tell you to never use AI. That's just not feasible in either direction. But how AI can help you, speaking as someone who is like doing a lot of research now, both in science and in other areas, I would say AI can help you be a lot more informed on your topic without you having to be a human encyclopedia. So Throughout this round, I thought a lot of arguments were potentially not very feasible or nuanced, and I understand that not everyone can know everything. For example, arguments about like using, once again, I'm not trying to offend anyone in specific, but arguments about like using public transport or arguments about, stopping cooperation with China or breaking or having people buy things based on where it's from rather than the cost of the object. I think those, with a little bit more research and knowledge about the topic in the world, and the research that already exists out there, it would have been a much more feasible argument. So please use AI and like those deep research tools and other like techniques, just general research also, or like collaborative prepping to become more informed and come up with more innovative impacts. Rehash is obviously a big issue in many debate rounds. It was a little bit of an issue here, just ever so slightly, but nowadays when everyone gives the same speech, not the same speech, but like a speech on the same bill, just one after another, and there's not really much of like flipping or crystalling as much as there used to be. If you've ever read Nick's Congress is Boring article on the EIF blog, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But now that there's not much of that, you need to be innovative and you need to come up with impacts that other people have not mentioned, and you need to deepen their impacts or connect them to more indirect impacts that can be more breadth and more depth. So you'll see my ballots a lot. You want to broaden your arguments and deepen your arguments. For example, a lot of people mentioned on the EVs bill, the environment will be harmed if XYZ happens. Right, so how can you deepen that argument? Is you can say the environment will be harmed and that harms the economy and that grows social immobility and also hurts our future. How can you broaden that argument? You can say it affects more people because when the entire Earth's climate changes, it's not just the US and China that's suffering the consequences. The entire world is going to lose a lot of money, and there's a lot of information out there estimating how much we stand to lose economically, from a humanitarian perspective, even if the climate change rises, like the overall temperature rises by 1 degree Celsius, or if the pollution like level reaches a certain degree. So that's something definitely work on having more creative impacts and making sure they're feasible before you base your entire speech off of an impact. I saw some attempts with trying to use a more quirky, if you will, impact. And then most of the speech was spent on that impact. But if it wasn't feasible, then your entire speech pretty much just went to like lack of feasibility and was not strong. My roommate's cat is here, but one other thing I wanted to mention is that the final speakers did not have as much or show as much round view as in evaluating the round overall, the strongest points on each argument on each side, and then summarizing what does it boil down to, and reminding the chamber what is the common warrant. A debate in any sense cannot happen if there is no common warrant. If both sides of the debate do not have one thing they're trying to achieve, for example, better environmental health or less humanitarian suffering, if they don't agree on that one thing, then no debate is ever going to happen. Remind the chamber what both sides are trying to fight for if you're one of the final speakers. Doesn't have to take very long, just be brief and remind people based on all of the arguments and the most important arguments on each side, why your side is going to achieve that common objective stronger. This is especially important if you're in a round with lay judges who are going to be possibly lost or bored by the end of the round when hearing all these speeches and all these different impacts that they're not really informed on. I also want to echo our other judge, Leonard's point about delivery. I know this is a virtual environment. It is a hot Saturday afternoon. So thank you all, of course, for being here. But delivery-wise, I thought this round was pretty lacking. Heard a lot of monotone delivery, lack of structure in speeches at times, lack of road mapping. Road mapping isn't as important if you're dealing with tech judges, but lack of organizing the different arguments and having them in an order that flows and is chronologically sensible. I thought hand gestures to me are not as important. It can't hurt, but there was not as much pathos or emotional appeal either in the delivery and tone of voice nor in the language itself. Some of the attempts at humor or transitions were ineffective and slightly awkward, and some just did not attempt transitions or pauses at all. I would have liked to see a lot more variation potentially in speed or transitions to really drive a point home and give the chamber time to contemplate the importance of your previous point. Slow down, emphasize, bring it back to the common warrant of both sides so everyone can really understand that you are on track and driving your point back to the objective that everyone's trying to achieve. For speakers on both sides, I thought many of you did a good job proving lack of net harm if you're on the AF or lack of net gain if you're on the neg. But one of the advices that I always got or got a few times by one of the experienced judges in my district in Florida was that proving lack of net harm or lack of net gain itself is not going to be effective in telling someone because passing a bill is complicated. All of these bills, whether they're big or small, they're going to have action and delegate resources away from other places. So if you're going to convince someone to pass or fail, inevitably there's no perfect side. So if you're going to convince the other side to give up the benefits on their side or give up the harms on their side, then you need to prove that you have a net gain on the AF or a net harm on the neg. Lack of net harm plus net gain is a lot more effective than just proving lack of net harm. And you need to be explicit with that, of course. Like you can't just say something and expect someone to extrapolate what you mean. Be more direct, and that comes with like speech structure and emphasis in your delivery. Overall, I thought very good rounds. Some of you relied too much on one niche point that didn't really come across as effective, and others relied on being like spreading themselves too thin across several arguments, which I thought was common for like entry-level debaters, but here maybe you were trying to get a lot done in 3 minutes. But thank you all once again for being here, and I really enjoyed judging this. Some really interesting arguments. So, any questions? If you have a question, you can just unmute, I guess.
Okay. I was just wondering, especially with what you were saying about impacts and then late round speeches, would you say or how do you kind of like navigate the line between giving like a unique impact, which might not affect as many people versus like weighing the magnitude or like kind of extending impact that would be more that would have a bigger impact essentially, like a bigger magnitude?
That's a great question. If I'm understanding you correctly, you're trying to say like how do you navigate the line between a niche group of people who aren't very isn't very a big group and a group of people who like but you don't want to disregard that group of people because they're important too. So I would say like if we're doing congressional debate, I know politically it's been a big contention point lately that at the end of the day, the US government is going to serve American interests and the people are going to serve the interests of their wallet. You need to evaluate for yourself, is this ultimately going to somehow affect the American people and the American personal finance? I'm not saying that I agree with the stance that maybe other lives are not as valuable abroad, but that is ultimately going to hit home a lot harder. And it is going to be the line if you're talking about a political issue as the US Congress. I would say, for example, the point about climate change abroad, that is something that's going to greatly impact the whole world and the US if we don't change it now. At the same time, upping the price of electrical vehicles is also going to affect American economy and the American daily life greatly. So I would say ask yourself, how much is this going to affect daily life, like everyday life that you can see, versus and then how much it's going to affect the future. If you can generalize your impact to saying affecting this now is a sign of something bigger to come, or this impact in a smaller group of people is going to ultimately hurt a very large group of people, then I would say bring it up. If it's not going to be able to be generalized to that, then you can still bring it up. I just wouldn't spend as much time on it, you know?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? You can just unmute yourself. David, go ahead.
How informal. On the topic of like micro versus macro impacts, do you think it's just a better rule of thumb to always go more macro?
Elaborate on what you mean by macro versus micro.
For EVs, there was a lot of specific impacts related to cars, then you had more general impacts related to, how climate change affects the world.
I would say
Like,
that, okay, I would say that all comes down, this is once again a question of critical thinking, which I know is an endangered act in our day and age.
wait, what's that?
Critical thinking? Oh, I'm
Never heard of
sorry.
it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I always did when I did prep or wrote essays and papers was that brain dumping is very important. Look at an impact, whether it's micro or macro, and then sit in a room and dump out everything you could think of that is possibly related to this. Indirect impacts, direct impacts, who will be affected, when it will happen, future, past, everything. Then you go in and evaluate which of those impacts are feasible and important. You can also use AI to help you brainstorm because obviously you're not an encyclopedia. There are some impacts that AI can think of that you cannot, and also ask your friends and coaches, please, to help you brainstorm. If you're talking a micro impact, it could very well be generalized to a macro impact. For example, if you increase like the price of an EV by X amount of money, then you could generalize that very well to people who rely on individual transportation, people who cannot rely on public transportation. Those people might not have enough to buy groceries or afford healthcare anymore. That's a indirect impact that you could mention. Obviously, you would have to link it and warrant and say that it actually feasibly will happen. But I think almost anything can be connected if you can find evidence and enough critical thinking for it and then articulate it in a way that makes it seem connected.
Do you mind if
So
I just
I guess anything micro could become macro and vice versa. Yeah.
do you mind if I just add to that too?
Yeah, go ahead.
David, I don't think there's an answer between what is better in terms of a micro or macro impact, because both of them are valuable. In a lot of ways, it's a way to extend an impact, right? Rather than just like Judge Tian was saying, right? You could take a micro impact and expand it or extend it into a macro impact. I think what's more important for your impacts is that you have something that is some sort, as Judge Tian was saying too, one of the ways that I teach impacts are just you need to get to a human level impact once you're proving something is going to happen, right? And that human level impact for me needs to prove three things. It needs to prove who such like what group is being helped or hurt, how they're being helped or hurt, and to what extent they're being helped or hurt. When you answer those three things, you'll probably get to more commonly a micro impact, but like we were saying, it can always be extended to so long as if it is proved through avenues of critical thinking, through additional research evidence, things like that.
That makes sense. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I think one thing I did want to add also is that I agree that there's no clear line on what is macro versus micro, and also no clear line on which is better. There is rarely ever a clear line on like whether you should include one argument over another. I mean, if you know what I mean, like that's a broad statement, but it's also about the round itself. If you feel like the one macro or micro argument has been mentioned and driven into the ground already, then be redundant and go with the other one. Be unique. Broaden your side's argument. But if you're an earlier round speaker, or if you feel like the previous speakers in the round have not covered one impact for far enough with enough context that's relevant, then go deeper. So it is, I guess, a question of do you think in the context of the round and where it's going so far, do you think it's more important for an impact to have breadth or depth?
Was that rhetorical?
Yeah, I mean, it's just something to contemplate for everyone, I guess. But
Okay, thanks. Just making sure.
anyone else? Anyone else? Okay.
Oh wait, I just wanted to know, like, what do you guys mean by micro and macro impacts? Like unique impacts?
So what I'm understanding from David's definition, I also asked him to clarify because there is a fine line that doesn't exist all the time, but what he meant was that macro is more large scale and it's easier on the surface level if you don't do much critical thinking to generalize it to a large group of people. For example, climate change is going to take away clean water and ecosystem services from billions of people and drive like social mobility to be even worse than it already is because poor people obviously live in places that are more crowded and underprivileged. Micro would be like this specific group of people, such as electric car owners in the US, will be impacted by XYZ. But then what I was saying is that you can generalize a micro impact to be a macro impact and vice versa. Macro impacts, if you really nitpick and dissect them and who they're affecting, like Judge Leonard said, they really do impact people on a micro level. And that's why people care in the first place. Honestly, people in this world are selfish. Nobody cares about an issue unless it's affecting daily life on a personal level. So I guess every macro issue is micro in a sense. And do see the message in the chat, please. That's very important. Um, yeah, I guess that's all for me for now.
I've got to head out in a bit, so I'd like you to hear my feedback before I gotta go. My name's Divya, if you don't know me, and it's super awesome for me to have gotten the chance to meet you all. I went to the University of Chicago, just graduated this past June, and I now work at Morgan Stanley, which has been a fun transition to now be a part of the working public. It's been a tough one. But I went to the University of Chicago, but before that, I had debated in congressional debate for about 7 years in the San Francisco Bay Area as a part of the Doherty Valley team. And then I coached the Doherty Valley team for about 2 years before I then got swamped with my own thesis and all college stuff. I just want to emphasize to all of you that I think this round was fantastic. Obviously, I think you've heard just a lot of critical feedback. I'm going to have some critical feedback, but I do want to emphasize to all of you the importance of you all participating in this in July, in the middle of your summer, when summers still matter, and help creating a resource that can be helpful for students across the board. That in and of itself is something I give you a huge round of applause for, and is something that, when I was a debater, I had the fortune of having a really great team around me. If I didn't have a really great team around me, resources like these would have meant the world to me. So props to all of you for even being here. One thing I did want to say is that I think you all are the type of debaters that understand what good arguments are. Where I think your biggest areas for growth are in two areas. I think the first is with your evidence quality. And I say that because, the first debate was on political violence. I specialized in political violence. My thesis was written on political violence. My mentor is one of the leading political violence theorists and scholars in the country. So for me, this evidence was not as strong as I think it could have been. And so particularly for debates where, a lot of the conversation, a lot of the innovation and ideas is happening at a scholarly level, you really should be using peer-reviewed academic resources. So I would actually disagree with the previous judge. I stray away from AI quite frequently. I use it for personal purposes, but when it comes to, giving a speech that will be put in a public setting when it comes to evidence quality and research, I would have an opposite view on that. And I also think it's really important for you all to get used to reading academic sources now before you head off into college, where you're going to be engaging with that type of literature very frequently, especially if you plan on doing research or you plan on going into fields that will be academic in nature post-grad. So I think it's super important for you all to get used to understanding, okay, what's the methodology of the studies that I'm using? What are, what types of assumptions are they making? What's the literature that they're engaging themselves in? Even reading a couple of literature reviews from just, the top academic journals in the nation will give you a really good sense of where are the key, points of conversation on this topic. So when it comes to, civil wars and insurgencies and the role of foreign aid, there are quite a few journals that cover this. And there are scholars that have had, perspectives like that compared to the range of perspectives that were in this debate. Totally fine. I was just proposing a different perspective on that. Those range of perspectives are demonstrated in an academic peer-reviewed setting. I think that's the perfect setting for you to be able to understand where is the depth and the breadth of this topic and where can I pull arguments out of, because these are scholars that are on the ground. There are scholars that were, in Myanmar that understand the key kind of local level and regional level dynamics of the situation. For that, and also for the EV debate, I think it's just important for you all to be moving away from the more news-based sources that you all are using and into more academic level sources. It's good for your current, for you as debaters, but it's even more important for your, professional development moving forward. The other thing that I was kind of shocked was there was once in like a lifetime that I see that an amendment is passed in a congressional round. I never really engaged with a lot of amendments being passed. Don't just ignore the amendment when it's passed. Use the amendment in your speeches. It just shows to me that you all are a lot more organically engaged with the debate, and you're not just giving your canned speeches. One of the most important things to me as a debater, and it still remains really important to me when I'm in a place where someone's giving me a presentation or someone's engaging in a debate, is organic debate, which means that you understand the topic at a level that, you may not be, like the previous judge said, you're not going to be an encyclopedia, but you're someone that understands where are the key areas of contention here. And you can then make an argument off the cuff for that. My recommendation is, I know that Equality and Forensics also has, extemp resources. That's a perfect place for you all to kind of pick up that off the cuff argumentation nature. Is give a couple of extemp speeches on the topics that you are frequently debating in congressional debate. It teaches you how to come up with ideas and arguments off the cuff. And that's something that's super important, especially if you're in situations where you have to flip sides and you weren't necessarily anticipating that. And I think that is super important because I'm going to talk about this kind of split situation that you all dealt with. I know that sucks. I've been I've had my frequent share of that. In the national final round that my senior year that I competed in, I was forced to flip 3 times, like 2 to 3 times. It sucks. It sucks doing it at a level that it's high level. But what I want to emphasize to you all is 2 things. One, don't just go off of what someone says that they're going to, what side someone says they're going to speak on at the beginning of the round. Someone may have made the decision, oh, okay, so it's AF heavy right now. Let me switch to neg preemptively. And then you suddenly have a neg heavy split when you were thinking that it was an AF heavy split. Or a person may not have fully committed to the side that they are going to speak on, and they may have said one thing over the other. Don't assume that that split is entirely accurate. You should be prepped to go at any time and on any side. I know that's a lot to ask of you all, especially because you're in school. Debate is such a work-intensive activity already. And this is what I mean by this practice of off-the-cuff argumentation built off of your base knowledge is going to be super important for you moving forward. Of, okay, if I have to switch last minute, I know how to do that because I have the base knowledge to be able to come up with an argument and to call out kind of the mischaracterizations made by the other side. The other thing that I was really surprised about with the EV debate is, you all were talking about affordability. When we were talking about this impact conversation that was just happening right before I started talking, it's important for you all to just explicitly call out what do you mean by affordability? You're talking about consumers. Like, does the AF world or the neg world help consumers more? And there are multiple ways that consumers can be benefited, right? One characterization I think by by Senator Ostheimer was, are we creating a world where the cars and the transportation system that we're using is carbon intensive. Is that beneficial or harmful to consumers? Call out the specific individuals or the specific groups or stakeholders in this debate. Considering all aspects of your debate to be based off of a stakeholder analysis I think just will be really helpful for you in finding where your arguments, while seeming disparate, actually have a lot to share. And then the final thing is, I, as a debater, loved crystallization speeches. I think, they're my favorite type of debate to do, especially if you're that type of person that loves arguing and you're that type of person that has that base knowledge. But it's important to remember that it's not a line by line recantation of the round. It's not, okay, this person said this, and then this person said this, and then this person said this. It's okay, how does this person's argument interact with this person's argument? And how I've always seen crystallization speeches are, it's the type of speaker that comes in at the end of the round. The round has been confusing. It's been a bunch of people saying a bunch of things at each other with no, clear understanding of where the round has ended up. And that person comes in and says, you know what? I know that round was I know the last 50 minutes to an hour were super confusing for you. Let's just break this down. And in simple terms, it's none of the rhetoric, none of the fluff, none of that time wasting stuff, and just says, I know that was confusing. Let me make this clear to you. And says, these are the two areas that we were talking about. We were talking about affordability for the EV debate, or we're talking about, and I think someone attempted to do this in the Myanmar debate, and I left it for them of I don't necessarily see that these were the two questions that the debate landed on, but I'm happy you tried to put it in terms of two questions, as opposed to, let's just go by a line recantation. So putting it in terms of, these were the buckets that we were all kind of dancing around, and then being explicit about how do these arguments interact with each other. I agree with the previous judges that it's important for you all to extend on impacts in those crystallization speeches. What I don't agree on is I don't think it's a good idea for you to bring in new points in the last speech of the round. It just does not make sense to me. At that point, we don't need a new point, What we need is clarification on how the round went and why your side wins this round. It's not, I see it very similar to a public forum in a final focus, as opposed to this is another constructive speech. And I mean, it's in my paradigm. I see this as far more of a debate event than I do a speech event. The final thing I wanted to emphasize to all of you is this: you all have all the right ideas in a lot of ways. You have the right arguments. You're looking for the right, you have the right ways of thinking. You're just not interacting as much as you should be. And that requires explicitly calling out, okay, this person, you'll see it in my detailed feedback, but explicitly calling out, all right, if I'm talking about affordability and the other person's talking about affordability as well, let me explicitly call out that person's argument as what I'm responding to in my speech. I think there wasn't enough of, you're dancing around, hey, I'm refuting to this person's argument, as opposed to just being straight up of, that person's argument is what I'm responding to, and here's why I think it's wrong. So I think what I want to emphasize to all of you is, one, congratulations for taking the time out of your life to do this. That's a remarkable thing. Second is, I see incredible quality in all of you as debaters, but for your, debate growth as debaters and your growth professionally, I think there are areas for you to use stronger evidence, to see those natural connections between arguments on both sides and even on your own side. So what I want to emphasize to you all is, you all are fantastic. You'll see in my kind of sheet, you just Command F your name, you'll find my specific notes for you. My notes are very based on the speech itself and where I think content-wise it could have been preferable. But my email is always accessible. It's on my Tableau profile. It's going to be on that note, on that feedback sheet. Feel free to reach out anytime. I'm super happy to help. And if you're looking for academic journals or articles to look at, I have a whole list that I'm happy to share with you, and that you can refer to at any time when you're doing your research. But yeah, congratulations. You all have done such a fantastic job, and I'm super excited to have been with you. I'm happy to answer any questions while I'm still here.
So real quick, sorry, I have one question about constructive arguments coming in late. I think this is probably one of the things that has changed the most as a circuit norm, like in the past few years. because it's become much more conventional for people to bring in a like unique argument and find a way to integrate and apply it into the round, um, compared to like a traditional crystallization speech. So I personally I subscribe to this. I think this is good because I've never really been a fan of the prescribed constructive rebuttal crystallization paradigm as something that people have to necessarily stick to. The reason it sticks around is because that's what a lot of judges reward, in my experience. So when there is a unique argument that someone can bring into the late round, how do you see it as the responsibility of a last or second to last cycle speaker to like incorporate it?
So let me be clear about this one. So if you are the second to last or the last speaker, you should not be. And you should not be proposing that argument. If an argument has come up, let's say in the third to last or the fourth to last speech, you do need to integrate that into your response or your characterization of the round. The reason why I say that you shouldn't be bringing something new is, and I'll say this, for example, with the public transit argument that was brought up. I respect that person's decision to bring in a new argument. I don't agree that that was an argument that brought any value to the debate. And all respect to that debater. I think they did a fantastic job. It's not my problem with new argumentation at that late stage of the debate is what are you adding to the debate that hasn't already been added? Unless it's an impact that is important for weighing on magnitude, weighing on reversibility, weighing on probability. You are not adding an argument that suddenly wins the round, and that's unfortunate. There are very, very, very few cases when a debater actually successfully does that. Most of the time, they're bringing in an argument thinking that it's somehow going to change the characterization of the round and it's suddenly going to win the round when it doesn't. It's an argument that oftentimes is the same as previous arguments, but different warranting, maybe better evidence. It doesn't bring anything new to the debate. The other thing that I do want to bring up is I respect, I was in your position 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago. I'm really aging myself. And I remember disagreeing with what judges wanted out of the debate. And that is a totally fair, that's just how the circuit is going to evolve. I have aged myself out of the circuit in certain ways. But your judges are often people that were debaters from a previous era, and they're going to have different expectations. And I think it's knowing how to manage those expectations from your judges. So even if you want to see things a certain way, at the end of the day, the judge is the one ranking you, and the judge is the one giving you feedback. And it's there, if the predominant view amongst the judges is they want something that is more of a characterization of the round and a clarification of the round, as opposed to new argumentation, that's unfortunately what you're just going to have to go with moving forward. Maybe things will change as you all become judges on the circuit, that your expectations of how things should run will be different. But in the meantime, I know it sucks. I dealt with my own, situations with that where I disagreed with how a judge viewed the round or how the judge viewed my responsibility in the round. But I do think for your success, it may be helpful for you to just go with what the predominant judge view is in this case. And the reason I'll defend why I think it's super important. You're going to be in a lot of professional situations where it's important for you not to necessarily bring up a new point, especially when you're a leader in a room, but for you to synthesize, okay, what are the conversations that are happening here? Where should we end up inevitably? All right, if people are just arguing across the room about on various different points, how do we find a consensus that works for us moving forward and develops our next action steps? That's why I think that style of crystallization isn't just important for you as a debater, but it's important for you moving forward. You're going to be in situations where that skill set is so valuable for you, especially when you're in a leadership position. So hopefully that helped clear it up, and I empathize with you for having to deal with, for not necessarily agreeing with kind of the predominant judge view. Any other questions?
I had a question specifically about evidence. You mentioned how we should be using more technical evidence, academic journals. When we're doing that, what exactly is the best strategy? Are we citing the abstract? Are we mentioning the methodology in our speech because it's very limited, it's 3 minutes? What's the strategy behind how we cite academic journals versus just regular citations?
That's a great point. So I think at a base level, you should be obviously read the abstract. It's going to be, and read the abstract for kind of any of the articles that you come across, because that will be an indication of, okay, is this even related to the conversation? You shouldn't cite straight out of the abstract though. Abstracts, as someone that has written some of them frequently, They are really just really quick summaries. You're trying to fit them within 250 words, and they're not getting into kind of the nuances of the results or the conclusions that the authors are finding. Where you want to pull it from is typically out of your results section. That's where you want to pull out the evidence that you will actually be citing in your speeches. But you should be reading the abstract, the introduction, the methodology, the literature review, and then the results section. That's often a lot, I know, but what is important for you is knowing when do you need to read the whole thing and when do you only need to read portions of it. So when I was saying to you all that it's important for you all to develop base knowledge, those are the places where you really want to focus on the literature review. That's when the person's done the grunt work for you of having scoured through hundreds and hundreds of articles to identify, okay, where are the key scholarly debates happening here? So when you're building your base knowledge, that's the places you turn to. You don't necessarily need to go to the results sections or the methodology. It's not necessarily going to be used in your speech. When you are trying to use that evidence, that article for your speech, it is important for you to kind of read as much of the article as you can, and specifically focusing on that methodology section, on that results section. You don't need to cite the methodology in your speech, but it is important for you to know that methodology, have it saved kind of in as a resource where you're doing your prep. The reason why that's super important is, especially you'll have noticed a lot of you will have debated minimum wage debates. Everyone has like 15 different studies that say 15 different things. You want to know what is the methodology of your study. Don't waste the time in the speech bringing it up, but if it's brought up during questioning, or you need to use, if someone brings it up as a refutation saying that my study is better than yours because of XYZ, you have the ability to back up your claim with, a study that has a strong methodology that is surpassing kind of the standard within that scholarly debate. So don't use the methodology, but have it as a resource if someone asks you about it, or if somebody refutes you and you have to respond to them in process.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So I obviously, as a college student who is doing a lot of research and looking back on my experience now, I've advised people on like what they should be paying more attention to, for example, critical thinking. But for you as someone who's even further along the college and career journey that we're all going on eventually, what advice do you think, what do you think that people in high school and in the early stages of college should spend a lot of time on? What skills should they spend developing, and what do you think they could maybe put to the side or do more like efficiently? Because like you said, we all have limited time, so.
Yeah, no. I think that's a really fair point. Where I think the critical thinking part is super important. I think that's a great piece of advice that you're offering to students of it's important for you to think through, how does this argument logically develop? So that's one thing. The second thing I think is presentation in general. So I have always emphasized to the students that I've coached that it's important to be someone that can be conversational. You can go back and watch my debates. I was an aggressive debater, point blank. But I do think being able to explain your arguments in a conversational tone and knowing how to switch from being that more, when you're giving rhetoric, you're in a more of an impassioned state, to when you're doing things in a more, when you're explaining things, when you're explaining concepts, building out logic, being in a more conversational tone, that's going to be super valuable for you when you're when you're having to give a presentation in front of senior leadership at your company, or in front of pretty big stakeholders in your classrooms or in your internships. Being able to explain things in a calm, in a collected, in a conversational tone, that is a super, super valuable skill. A lot of you have that as a base skill, but for this debaters who were like me and a little bit more aggressive or a little bit more impassioned, it's important to know when is that not as necessary compared to like a conversational tone that is. The other thing is, I think being someone that just engages with news, not just news, but also scholarly debates as much as possible. I went to the University of Chicago. It's known for the life of the mind. We just engage with theory all the time. I'm not saying do that and be obsessed with Marx and all that sort of stuff all the time. That's a Chicago thing. If you want to go there, happy to talk to you about what that looks like. But what I am saying is, all of you have interests. I mentioned to you all that I was interested in political violence. I would engage with that literature very frequently. I highly recommend that you all do the same for your topics, areas of interest. Engage with what are the key ideas around this space? If you're interested in AI, for example, we were just talking about it. There's so much happening in that space that it's important for you to not only look at what's happening in the news, what's happening at kind of an industry level, but what's happening at a scholarly level. And getting that habit is incredibly important for you when you're in classrooms and you're having to come up with a literature review for your midterm or your final assignment, or when you are working as a research assistant for a professor, and they're saying, okay, write me up like a draft literature review. Let's see where the conversation's happening. Or you're in front of your manager in an internship or in a full-time job, and you're trying to say to them, they've asked you to do some research, and you being able to pull all that information from your base knowledge and then finding the additional information to fill in your gaps. That's a baseline skill that's going to be so helpful for you moving forward. And the final thing is, I think, and I say this, which was why I stressed so much commendation for all of you for doing this, is giving back to, I think, these activities that have made you so successful. So don't sacrifice. You all have benefited so much from congressional debate or from any form of debate. Give back to that as you continue to advance in your lives. There will be people coming up behind you who have also participated in this, and giving back your knowledge, but also learning back from them is super important. So participating in things like this, frequently judging where you can, and talking highly of just what debate has offered to you, that all of that is super important. So that ethos of giving back is something that I emphasize to students often. But then again, I'm always learning. So I'm always happy to hear from people about what their advice is. And I think, Athena, you've done a great job with kind of emphasizing how important critical thinking is and encouraging students to take advantage of the different tools that have come up, once we've left the debate scene. Anything else that I can help with? Cool. All right. Well, congratulations to all of you. Once again, you've done a fantastic job. I unfortunately have to leave because I am studying for exams right now, and it's lunchtime over here in California. But thank you so much once again for a fantastic round. My email is in that document. You're more than welcome to reach out whenever for any questions, whether it's a job in finance, a job in politics, talking about that, talking about college applications. Please reach out whenever you'd like. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your evenings, and if you're seniors, congratulations and best of luck with your next steps.
I'm a trial attorney here in South Florida, so I don't have the debate background that the other judges have, and so I was looking at it from a very different perspective. I've judged a number of debate tournaments, and you all are excellent. Obviously, I think you know that. So differentiating between the excellent was nitpicking in terms of presentation, right? So what the substance of what the other judges have said, absolutely correct, and you should follow that advice. I'm looking at more presentation. I'm looking at more larger picture type of things in terms of whether it's in this debate tournament in Congress or in any other arena, if you go on to law school or if you go on to a business boardroom, how you conduct yourself, what you do, how you emphasize different things. That's what I was looking for and looking at. So that's most of what my comments will be. One thing that I would advise is across the board, one thing that I saw was look at the circumstance of what you're discussing before interjecting a joke or a creative presentation and how that will play. It's very important, right? Because the first presentation was about genocide, and then the second one was about collaborating on climate control. So those are two very different places to make jokes or not make jokes. And so you have to play that correctly. You can still do it creatively, but it may not be a joke. It may be something else more somber, more serious, a quote from a historian, something like that would actually play better in that first presentation versus a joke about EVs in the second presentation. So that I wanted to emphasize. The second was I really, really liked everyone who picked on presentations that were already done and impromptu noted those presentations and either supported them or contradicted them with sources. That was very important and impactful from what I saw. The last thing is and this is for everybody, and you'll get better at it. I mean, all of you are excellent at it already. I could not imagine being this good in high school with what you all do, but one thing is you can use different tools. Everyone has these at your disposal. Your tone of voice, for example, your facial expressions. These are very good tools to be able to use to emphasize or de-emphasize an argument. I know it sounds silly to say because we don't emphasize it enough. We don't say these things enough, but slowing down and speaking at an important point, pausing, speeding up at less important points, or when you want to get through a certain point. These are tools that every one of you can use and practice. And the more you practice that, the better you get at it. And so when you're emphasizing something, remember to be able to use your tone of voice, to slow down, to speed up however you want. The other thing is, if you're going after someone, let's say, for example, the presenter just before you is Af and you're Neg, and that presenter was very fast and very high pitched, very, forceful, you can take the opposite approach and it would be a good contrast. So play off of each other that way, and those things matter, right? So these are things that matter probably less so in the Zoom environment and more so in person, but it does matter significantly. I do trials in Zoom, I do trials in person. These things matter to judges, to juries, to lay people who are listening. So when you're using those tools that everyone has and you fine tune them, that it really will show. And some of you all show that already, but you can still be better at that. So those are my points. Thank you.
Just one more thing to add on. After hearing what everyone else said, I think analyzing beyond the surface level is so incredibly important in every context. As someone who has moved on and gone from debate and gone on to different things, I think being able to analyze a situation quickly and then articulate and verbalize in a convincing manner why your stance is defensible is going to go a long way. You all are clearly dedicated people. Every time I get involved in the debate space, or re-involved, I guess, I get more impressed by the amount of ambition and sacrifice that people are willing to put into this, both students, parents, and coaches alike. So thank you once again for still being here like an hour after the round ended. But for example, if an interviewer asks you a question that you're not prepared for example, like, why do you specifically want to work at this exact company when there are 100 other companies that do the exact same thing? And everyone's on the surface can think like, oh, I need to make a living, and this is a field that I am somewhat hopefully interested in. But how do you articulate on the spot in this high pressure environment in a convincing manner that you are the best candidate and they have to listen to you and what you have to say? They have value in paying you to bring you to the table and into the boardroom. That's something Divya also touched on, but something you're obviously getting a lot of practice with now. Please just do not let this age and the influences around you take away from you becoming more informed and becoming good researchers. People move with their pocketbooks. Polls are moved by pocketbooks move polls, however you want to say it. And that obviously partially is driven by time and efficiency. But if you learn now to become an efficient researcher, that will help you so much down the line. And by efficient researcher, I don't mean using zero AI in my opinion, but just resisting the influence from our current generation that is over reliant on others. And if you have younger siblings, please tell them to read books, because I work with high school students in research and essay writing, and you can tell when someone was a strong reader. They just read faster, read better. They have a natural process when they're either speaking or writing that makes them sound more well-spoken, professional, concise, and informed about their topic and about themselves. So that's a little bit more of a ramble from me, but overall, once again, cannot express enough gratitude for all of you and the amount of time effort that you put into this activity?
Yeah, just to add on to both of those, I promise it'll be quick. I mean, you hear a lot about different people's experiences. Judge Tian's right now a student at Northwestern, for example. Judge Baloo is in law, and then you have Judge Divya. I will butcher her last name, so I'm not going to try. But Judge Divya, who's in finance, right? I'm currently working in tech. Work as a tech consultant. I'm also going to be an engineer in the next few weeks. Working at a Fortune 500 company too. Um, just keep in mind how the other like intangibles that debate's going to be giving you for anybody that's listening to this call, as well as for you all too. One of the most beautiful parts about debate, right, is that you have to be able to argue both sides of pretty much every argument. That's how you prepare too. But in doing so, right, it allows you to critically think about each side and understand every thought, every opinion, every discourse that we have, whether in politics, whether in professional setting, all those come from different opinions, different experiences, and all of those things, right? So as you get to learn and research and be able to see essentially both sides, you can have more informed judgments as well as be able to articulate both sides, understand each other, empathize for each other too, and that'll just lead to naturally better conversations and discourse overall. In a professional setting too, you'll be able to see and recognize pretty quickly some of the things that other people, especially business leaders, don't necessarily think about when they are considering business decisions. So the skills that you all are building now are really important, both the tangibles and intangibles. So keep working at those. Like the other judges were saying too, be involved in debate. There's a reason why we are all here too, is because we see value in this activity, see value in investing our time as well as our thoughts with you all too. And the more that we can make debate a better activity, I guarantee you, the stronger, more involved, and the better, I think, overall, both the country, the world, everything's going to be with people like you all helping influence decisions.